Chapter 2169. Faced with Shen Hui's question, the elder did not dare to speak again. He was afraid that if he said something wrong, he would provoke Shen Hui's anger. Seeing that the elder had fallen silent, Shen Hui did not show any signs of getting angry. After asking 3 questions in a row, Shen Hui continued. Although the shrines do not fear the sword sect, we cannot create a strong enemy for ourselves for no reason. If you think that Wu Qinfeng's motley crew can contend with the sword sect, I can tell you right now that it is merely a daydream. Even if 20 or 30 sects join forces, they would be nothing more than a motley crew to the sword sect, let alone a dozen sects joining forces. You think that by doing this you can create some trouble for the sword sect. However, let me tell you this. Not only will your actions not cause any trouble for the sword sect, but you will also create a strong enemy for the shrines. If you want to contend with the sword sect, even the shrines will have to go all out. As such, do you still think that Wu Qinfeng's motley crew can contend with the sword sect? Upon hearing Shen Hui's words, the elder nodded respectfully and replied, I know my mistake. All right, on account of your unwavering loyalty to the shrines, I will forgive you this time. Go to the Valley of the Gods and reflect on your mistakes behind closed doors. You are not allowed to leave for a year, Shen Hui said with a wave of his hand. He did not punish the elder severely. After all, Shen Hui could feel his loyalty to the shrines. Even if such a person had made some mistakes, as long as they were not too serious, Shen Hui would not be too harsh on him. Furthermore, this time, the matter had not caused any losses to the shrines because the white-robed elder had stopped it in time. As such, there was naturally no need to be too harsh on him. After ordering the elder to leave, Shen Hui turned to look at the white-robed elder beside him. The smile on his face did not disappear. There are always some people in this world who are willing to daydream. Haha. In Shen Hui's opinion, the actions of Wu Qinfeng and the rest were undoubtedly courting death. They thought that by joining forces they would be able to contend with the sword sect. Did they not look at the current situation in the Great Thousand World? Apart from the Sword Mansion, the chaos in the other prefectures was quickly suppressed with the help of the 10 Lingtian sects. In the face of the 10 great Lingtian sects, even if the ordinary forces were to join forces, they would not be able to contend against them. What a joke! Wu Qinfeng and the others actually did not realize this point. Or did they think that just because Sword Sect was not one of the 10 great Lingtian sects, they would be able to contend against them? However, although the Sword Sect was not yet one of the 10 Lingtian sects, it already had the strength of one of the 10 Lingtian sects. This was because all of the Lingtian sects had to be cautious when facing the Sword Sect. This was also the reason why the Sword Sect was able to split the Heavenly Mansion into 2 and form an independent Sword Mansion in the hands of the Heavenly Sect. However, the Heavenly Sect still remained silent. Wu Qinfeng and the rest had thought too simply of the Sword Sect and Shaoqin. As soon as he finished speaking, Shen Hui stood up with his hands behind his back. He walked unhurriedly toward the periphery of the Sea of Flowers. As he walked, he muttered to himself, how could someone who could pull the sword sect back from the edge of the cliff, and even bring it to its current height be simple? Shao Chen, it seems like it's time for you to draw your sword. Shen Hui was certain that there would not be any changes in the Sword Mansion. Unless the 10 Lingtian sects made a move, no one would be able to change the current situation of the Sword Mansion. They would not even be able to cause a ripple. Since Shen Hui had stopped the shrines, this meant that Wu Qinfeng and the rest would no longer be able to get any help from the shrines. Unfortunately, Wu Qinfeng and the rest were still in the dark and did not know about this at all. At this moment, outside Tong City, Wu Qinfeng and the rest were still dreaming. They had even decided to hold the grand ceremony for the establishment of the alliance 2 days later. At the same time, Wu Qinfeng would become the alliance leader of the alliance. What was even more ridiculous was that Wu Qinfeng and the rest had even given their alliance a name, the Sword Reverse Alliance. The meaning of the Sword Reverse Alliance was obvious. They were going against the Sword Sect. They had no intention of hiding the news at all. Therefore, the establishment of the Sword Reverse Alliance quickly spread around Tong City. In the back garden of the city governor's estate, Xiao Chun, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan were sitting together. At this moment, Xiao Chen was rocking back and forth with laughter. Haha, the Sword Reverse Alliance. Interesting, interesting. After hearing about the Sword Reverse Alliance, Xiao Chen's first reaction was not anger, but amusement. This was because in Xiao Chen's opinion, this so-called Sword Reverse Alliance was like a child's play. Xiao Chen did not get angry at the establishment of the Sword Reverse Alliance. Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan, who were beside him, also could not help but laugh. Thinking about it, if a mere Sword Reverse Alliance was enough to contend against the Sword Sect, then the Sword Sect would have been annihilated hundreds of times already. After laughing, Xiao Chen looked at Nangong Guan and the others and said, "Senior apprentice brother, isn't this what people always say? If you want to destroy something, you must first make it crazy." Wu Qinfeng and the rest were indeed crazy. It could even be said that they were openly challenging the authority of the Sword Sect. The establishment of the Sword Reverse Alliance was not concealed in the slightest. In fact, Wu Qinfeng and the rest had even spread the news with great fanfare and invited everyone to attend the Sword Reverse Alliance's establishment ceremony. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Nangong Guan took a sip of wine and said indifferently, "Perhaps we were too easygoing before, so these guys overlooked something. In the past, when the Sword Sect had dealt with these foreign forces and cultivators, they had indeed been very peaceful and had never suppressed them. It was because of this that Wu Qinfeng and the rest had overlooked the Sword Sect's strength. It could even be said that they felt that the Sword Sect was too cowardly." Hearing Nangong Guan's words, Xiao Chen's smile didn't fade, but a cold light flashed in his eyes as he said, "Then let's have Tsang Xing remind them and wake them up." Xiao Chen had already handed over the matter of Wu Qinfeng and the others to Tsang Xing, so Xiao Chen had no intention of interfering. Hearing this, Zhou Song spoke up. "Junior apprentice brother, are you leaving everything to Tsang Xing? We don't need to do anything?" "No need. If we had to send out 4 vice sect masters to deal with a bunch of mobs, wouldn't that make us a laughingstock? Tsang Xing alone is enough. In fact, I think that Tsang Xing might not even personally appear because Wu Qinfeng and the others aren't qualified enough for the Sword Sect's vice sect masters to take action," Xiao Chen replied with a relaxed expression. "Please add this to your collection, monthly votes and recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2170. There was no way that Xiao Chen would personally deal with a bunch of clowns like Wu Qinfeng. After all, as the sect leader of the Sword Sect, if he needed Xiao Chen to personally deal with a mere Wu Qinfeng, wouldn't that be telling the world that the Sword Sect had no capable people? There was no way that Xiao Chen would personally deal with a bunch of clowns like Wu Qinfeng. After all, as the sect leader of the Sword Sect, if he needed Xiao Chen to personally deal with a mere sword sect like Wu Qinfeng, wouldn't that be telling the world that the sword sect had no capable people? Therefore, Xiao Chen wouldn't care about this matter. Moreover, according to Xiao Chen's guess, even Tsang Xing wouldn't personally deal with this matter, because Wu Qinfeng and the others weren't worthy. While Xiao Chen and the others were chatting on the other side, in Tsang Xing's residence, an elder of the sword sect strode into the room and respectfully bowed to Tsang Xing, reporting to the vice sect leader, "In 2 days, the Sword Defiance Alliance will be holding an establishment ceremony outside Tong City." The Sword Defiance Alliance. When Tsang Xing heard the elder's words, his expression didn't change at all. He simply said indifferently, "Sword Defiance Alliance, ha!" With a cold laugh, Tsang Xing waved his hand, indicating for the elder to leave. Then, he took out a sound transmission talisman and sent a message back to the sword sect. At such a crucial time, Tsang Xing actually sent a message back to the sword sect. The person he sent this message to was the most senior sword head in the sword sect, Zhao Yu. As the most senior sword head in the sword sect, Zhao Yu's cultivation had long reached the great circle of the Dao realm. As long as he could break through to the end realm, he would definitely become the vice sect leader. In the sword sect, Zhao Yu was cultivating with Qianling when he suddenly received Song Xing's message. A golden light entered his forehead, and a moment later, Zhao Yu opened his eyes. Seeing Zhao Yu come back to his senses, Qianling asked curiously, "Who is it?" Vice Sect Master Song Xing. Hearing this, Zhao Yu replied truthfully. Vice Sect Leader Song Xing? What's the matter? Qianling was even more curious. In response to Qianling's question, Zhao Yu told him the contents of Song Xing's message. Actually, the content of Song Xing's message was very simple. It was just a simple order. Song Xing ordered Zhao Yu to be in charge of the Sword Reverse Alliance, and to rush to Tong City within 2 days. Before the Sword Reverse Alliance's establishment ceremony, they would uproot the Sword Reverse Alliance. In short, Song Xing didn't want to see any Sword Reverse Alliance in the Great Thousand World. As for what to do, Zhao Yu could decide. Hearing about the Sword Reverse Alliance, Qianling was first stunned, but then he laughed coldly. Sword Reverse Alliance. What kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry dares to provoke my sword sect? I'll go with you. Qianling took the initiative to say that he wanted to go with Zhao Yu to Tong City. Although Qianling didn't know much about the Sword Reverse Alliance, since they dared to name themselves after the Sword Reverse Alliance, only death awaited them. Zhao Yu didn't reject Qianling's offer. Moreover, Zhao Yu didn't plan to just let the two of them go. Song Xing's intention was very simple. This time, the Sword Reverse Alliance was courting death, so they just had to destroy it. However, destroying the Sword Reverse Alliance was a small matter for the Sword Sect. What Song Xing really wanted to see was to use the Sword Reverse Alliance's incident as an example to others. Otherwise, no Tom, Dick, and Harry would dare to provoke the Sword Sect in the future. To put it bluntly, he wanted to use the Sword Reverse Alliance as an example. Therefore, after receiving Song Xing's order, Zhao Yu and Qianling immediately paid a visit to the other sword chief. In the end, under Zhao Yu's invitation, a total of 10 sword chiefs with Dao realm cultivation led hundreds of elders with Dao realm cultivation to Tong City. As the sword sect continued to grow in strength, there were now more than 30 sword chiefs in the sword sect. In other words, there were more than 30 Dao realm experts in the sword sect. Although there weren't many people, only a little over 100 in total, the weakest of them was in the Dao realm. There were even 10 sword chiefs with Dao realm cultivation. Zhao Yu clearly understood Song Xing's intentions. The departure of Zhao Yu and the others didn't alarm too many people. After sending a message to Zhao Yu, Song Xing didn't care about the Sword Reverse Alliance anymore. However, one night before the Sword Reverse Alliance's so-called grand ceremony, Tian Nong actually took the initiative to ask to see Song Xing. It was already late at night, and the Sword Reverse Alliance's so-called grand ceremony was tomorrow. Tian Nong asked to see Song Xing. Hearing this, Song Xing, who was cultivating in the courtyard, calmly said, "Let him in." With Song Xing's permission, Tian Nong was led into the courtyard by a deacon of the sword sect. From afar, he saw Song Xing sitting cross-legged in the courtyard cultivating in the pavilion. Seeing that Song Xing was cultivating, Tian Nong didn't dare to disturb him and could only wait patiently. Since Song Xing didn't summon him, Tian Nong naturally didn't dare to interrupt Song Xing's cultivation. After 2 hours, Song Xing slowly opened his eyes and looked at Tian Nong, who had been waiting for a long time. "Tian Nong, why did you ask to see me so late at night?" "Vice Sect Master, tomorrow is the grand ceremony of the Sword Reverse Alliance. This lowly one is here because Tian Nong originally came to see that Song Xing hadn't done anything. Since tomorrow was the grand ceremony of the Sword Reverse Alliance, Tian Nong was worried, so he came early. After all, this was the best opportunity for Tian Nong to perform meritorious deeds after joining the sword sect. Tian Nong didn't want to mess it up, nor did he want to disappoint Xiao Qin. He saw that Tian Nong had come here because he was worried about what would happen the next day. In fact, Tian Nong's worries weren't unfounded. After all, if the grand ceremony of the Sword Reverse Alliance was allowed to proceed smoothly, it would be a great humiliation for the sword sect. He believed that Xiao Qin wouldn't want to see such an outcome. Therefore, they had to destroy this so-called Sword Reverse Alliance before tomorrow's grand ceremony. However, Tian Nong clearly didn't understand the strength of the sword sect, so before he could finish, Song Xing interrupted him. "What, do you think I need to personally deal with a mere Sword Reverse Alliance?" As an End Realm expert who held great power, Song Xing was naturally a very arrogant person. Facing a mere Sword Reverse Alliance, Song Xing had never thought of personally dealing with it. In his opinion, Wu Qinfeng's group wasn't worthy. Hearing Song Xing's words, Tian Nong hurriedly cupped his hands and replied, "This lowly one wouldn't dare." "This lowly one didn't mean that. Please forgive me, Vice Sect Master." "Alright, you don't have to worry about the Sword Reverse Alliance. The day of the grand ceremony will be the day they are destroyed." Song Xing waved his hand and said. Seeing this, Tian Nong naturally couldn't say anything more. He could only cup his hands and bow, then prepare to leave. However, just as Tian Nong was about to leave the courtyard, Song Xing's voice slowly sounded from behind him. "Since you've already joined the sword sect, how can you be so petty? A mere Sword Reverse Alliance is enough to make you so worried. Tian Nong, you have to remember that the sword sect's opponents are only the 10 great Lingtian sects. Apart from the 10 great Lingtian sects, the other factions aren't qualified to go against the sword sect. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2171. In Song Xing's eyes, the so-called Sword Defiance Alliance was nothing more than a joke. It was not worth his attention at all. Therefore, after handing the matter of the Sword Defiance Alliance to Zhao Yu, Song Xing no longer asked about it. Tian Nong, who was about to leave, suddenly heard Song Xing's words. He immediately turned around and bowed respectfully. Tian Nong will remember Vice Sect Master's words. After hearing Song Xing's words, Tian Nong was suddenly enlightened. At the same time, he realized that he had been making a big fuss over nothing. With the strength of the sword sect, how could the Sword Defiance Alliance that Wu Qinfeng had casually formed be enough to shake it? Didn't he choose to join the sword sect because of the strength of the sword sect? For a moment, Tian Nong was full of confidence in the sword sect. The last bit of worry in his heart had completely disappeared. After Tian Nong left, Song Xing closed his eyes and continued to cultivate. As for the matter of the Sword Defiance Alliance, Song Xing was not worried at all. Even if the Sword Defiance Alliance's founding ceremony was tomorrow, would they be able to successfully hold it? The night quickly passed. The next morning, in the temporary encampment of the Lingnan sect outside of Tong City, the location of the Sword Defiance Alliance's founding ceremony. Early in the morning, the disciples of the Southern Ridge sect and the other sects began to get busy, especially the disciples of the Southern Ridge sect. Because Wu Qinfeng was about to become the leader of the Sword Defiance Alliance, many of the Southern Ridge sect disciples were extremely excited, and unconcealable smiles hung on their faces. With Wu Qinfeng becoming the alliance master of the Sword Defiance Alliance, the Lingnan sect would naturally become the leader of the Sword Defiance Alliance. However, these disciples of the Lingnan sect were only thinking about the glory of the future. They did not think that a calamity was about to befall them. As time passed, more and more experts from the Sword Defiance Alliance showed up. Although the Alliance had invited some rogue cultivators, none of them had shown up. The local forces of the Sword Mansion would definitely not participate in the Sword Defiance Alliance's grand ceremony. In fact, if it wasn't for the Sword Sect, they would have already come knocking on his door. As for the few rogue cultivators who had received the invitation, they had also gathered in Tong City. Among them, the Dao Realm expert who represented the rogue cultivators to meet Xiao Qin was sitting on the main seat. This person's name was Wang Wu, and he was the well-deserved #1 expert amongst all the loose cultivators that had come from outside. Of course, Wang Wu had already joined the Sword Sect, but he hadn't announced it to the public yet. At this moment, many of the rogue cultivators had gathered together. Many of them looked at Wang Wu and asked, "Senior Wang Wu, are we really not going to attend the Sword Defiance Alliance's grand ceremony?" "What for? It's an alliance that's about to be destroyed. Are we going to die with them?" Wang Wu calmly replied. Hearing Wang Wu's words, the rogue cultivators present were stunned. Then, someone couldn't help but ask, "Senior Wang Wu, is the Sword Sect really going to destroy the Sword Defiance Alliance?" The Sword Defiance Alliance is not weak. It's an alliance formed by more than 10 forces. Their strength cannot be underestimated. Wang Wu couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. These people only saw that the Sword Defiance Alliance was formed by more than 10 forces, but they didn't see that these forces were like ants in front of the Sword Sect. To put it bluntly, if more than 10 ants worked together, wouldn't they still be ants? These people overestimated the Sword Defiance Alliance and underestimated the Sword Sect's strength. Of course, they couldn't be blamed. After all, with their current strength, it was very difficult for them to come into contact with powerful sects like the Sword Sect. As such, it wasn't strange that the ignorant were fearless. Wang Wu chuckled inwardly as he said, "Everyone, just wait and see. The Sword Defiance Alliance won't be able to survive this day." Wang Wu was certain that the Sword Defiance Alliance would be destroyed today. There was no chance of it being established. This so-called grand ceremony was nothing more than a joke. Seeing that Wang Wu was so confident, everyone present nodded one after another. With Wang Wu's prestige among many rogue cultivators basically believed what he said. Because of Wang Wu's presence, none of the rogue cultivators who had received the Sword Defiance Alliance's invitation went to the grand ceremony. This was because Wang Wu had already told them beforehand that if any of them were to attend this so-called grand ceremony, they would be responsible for anything that happened. If they wanted to accompany the Sword Defiance Alliance to the grave, Wang Wu would not stop them. Because of this, no one dared to go. However, everyone was waiting for the Sword Sect's reaction. They wanted to see if the Sword Sect was as powerful as Wang Wu had said. Many rogue cultivators gathered together, drinking and chatting as they waited for the outcome. "Do you guys think that the Sword Sect's sect master, Xiao Qin, will personally take action?" "I don't think so. After all, it would be embarrassing for the sect master to personally take action against the Sword Defiance Alliance." "I think so too. However, even if sect master Xiao Qin doesn't personally take action, the Sword Sect's vice-sect masters will definitely take action." "Yes, I also think that the Sword Sect's vice-sect masters will personally take action. However, I don't know how many vice-sect masters will take action. I think there will be at least 2. After all, the Sword Defiance Alliance isn't weak." Everyone gathered together, drinking and chatting. In their opinion, at least 2 vice-sect masters from the Sword Sect would personally take action to destroy the Sword Defiance Alliance. Hearing these people's words, Wang Wu didn't say anything. However, there was a trace of a smile on his face. Occasionally, he would even nod his head. In Wang Wu's opinion, these little fellows were too naive. Naturally, Xiao Qin wouldn't personally take action to destroy the Sword Defiance Alliance. Not only would Xiao Qin not take action, Wang Wu believed that even vice-sect masters like Song Xing wouldn't take action. According to Wang Wu's guess, this time, only the head of the Sword Defiance Alliance would take action. The Sword Defiance Alliance would probably be destroyed before even seeing a vice-sect master. To put it bluntly, in the eyes of Wang Wu and the other local forces of the Sword Mansion, the Sword Defiance Alliance was just a bunch of clowns who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Just as everyone was waiting for the outcome, outside of Tong City, the Sword Defiance Alliance's grand ceremony finally began. Wu Qinfeng and the other sect masters of more than 10 sects appeared one after another. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2172. Wu Qinfeng and the other sect masters appeared one after another. However, other than them, none of the other independent cultivators who received the invitation came. Wu Qinfeng and the other sect masters appeared one after another. However, other than them, none of the other independent cultivators who received the invitation came. After knowing the result, Wu Qinfeng's face was obviously gloomy. He snorted and said, "Humph, it must be Wang Wu, a cowardly rat." Wu Qinfeng immediately guessed that it was Wang Wu who stopped them. That was why no one came. However, Wu Qinfeng's guess was not accurate. Wang Wu did persuade them, but in fact, he did not stop anyone. Those independent cultivators who received the invitation did not come because they were afraid of the Sword sect. He was a little unhappy. After all, there were no guests. Wouldn't this so-called ceremony be like a show for himself? However, Wu Qinfeng could no longer turn back. He could only brace himself and continue with the ceremony. In addition, Wu Qinfeng was actually worried about the shrines. Originally, Wu Qinfeng planned to invite the shrine's experts to participate in the ceremony. However, after a few days, Wu Qinfeng could not contact the shrine's elder. This made Wu Qinfeng feel a little uncertain. After all, the shrines were the real source of Wu Qinfeng's confidence in fighting against the Sword sect. However, now, the shrine's experts did not appear. This made Wu Qinfeng a little anxious. There was a trace of doubt and apprehension in his heart. However, as time passed, Wu Qinfeng finally braced himself and announced the start of the ceremony. Wu Qinfeng and the other sect masters sat on a high platform built from ancient trees. As the alliance master, Wu Qinfeng naturally sat on the main seat. He nodded slightly to a Lingnan sect elder beside him. Seeing this, the elder shouted, "Everyone, the Sword Defiance Alliance's founding ceremony will now begin." He loudly announced the start of the grand ceremony. However, just as this elder's voice sounded, an extremely untimely sneer was transmitted from the sky. Sword Defiance Alliance? What a joke. It's just a bunch of mobs. His voice was filled with disdain. Hearing this, Wu Qinfeng immediately stood up and shouted angrily at the empty sky. "Who is it? Get the hell out here!" As the alliance master, Wu Qinfeng naturally could not lose face during the Sword Defiance Alliance's grand ceremony. As such, he spoke in an extremely domineering manner. As soon as he finished speaking, dozens of cracks of various sizes appeared in the sky. Moreover, people wearing the robes of the Sword sect's elders strode out from the cracks. Leading them were 10 Sword sect elders. Over 100 experts from the Sword sect descended together. Seeing this, Wu Qinfeng's eyes flashed with a trace of seriousness. Although he had already guessed that this would happen, when he actually faced the Sword sect, Wu Qinfeng could not help but feel a trace of fear. Although he knew that these people were experts from the Sword sect, Wu Qinfeng still deliberately asked, "Who else are you?" "He Wu Qinfeng, stop putting on an act here. How could you not know our identity?" Hearing this, the leader, Zhao Yu, immediately sneered and replied. Hearing this, Wu Qinfeng shouted with a gloomy expression, "He, what? Sect Master Xiao Chen did not show himself and let you come? You think you're qualified to talk to our sect master?" Zhao Yu's eyes flashed with killing intent. In Zhao Yu's opinion, a nobody like Wu Qinfeng was not qualified to mention Xiao Chen's name. It was as if wanting to meet Xiao Chen was simply a pipe dream. The killing intent in his eyes continued to condense. Not only Zhao Yu, but Qian Ling and the other sword heads of the Sword sect were also the same. Feeling the dense killing intent from Zhao Yu, Wu Qinfeng's fear grew deeper and deeper. At the same time, Wu Qinfeng also felt the cultivation realm of Zhao Yu and the others. More than 100 experts had arrived. The lowest cultivation realm was in the enlightenment realm, while the 10 sword heads, including Zhao Yu, were all in the Dao realm. More than half of them were in the Dao realm perfection stage, 10 Dao realm super experts and more than 100 enlightenment realm experts. Such strength made Wu Qinfeng feel a sense of powerlessness. In fact, from the beginning, Wu Qinfeng knew that the sword sect was not weak. There was no way he and the others could fight against the sword sect. Therefore, Wu Qinfeng's trump card all along could be said to be the shrines. Unfortunately, there was still no news from the shrines. The reinforcements that were supposed to come were also nowhere to be seen. The experts from the shrines did not appear. Instead, the people from the sword sect arrived. Looking at the aggressive Zhao Yu and the others, Wu Qinfeng suppressed the nervousness in his heart and said, "I want to see sect leader Shao Chen. There must be some misunderstanding between us and the sword sect." Wu Qinfeng kept insisting that he wanted to see Shao Chen. Little did he know that his attitude only made the killing intent in the hearts of Zhao Yu and the others even stronger. Zhao Yu snorted coldly and said with overflowing killing intent, "This old man has already said that you are not qualified to see the sect master. Kill him." Zhao Yu naturally would not hold back against Wu Qinfeng and the so-called Sword Defiance Alliance. Moreover, the order that Song Xing gave Zhao Yu was very simple, and that was to destroy the Sword Defiance Alliance. Following Zhao Yu's cold shout, the group of Swords Gate experts attacked one after another. When he saw this, the corners of Wu Qinfeng's eyes could not help but twitch. Unfortunately, he did not have much time to think as Zhao Yu had already taken the initiative to attack. Before the Sword Defiance Alliance's so-called grand ceremony officially began, the experts from the sword sect had already descended from the sky. For a moment, the two sides naturally clashed. However, in the face of the sword sect's strength, although the heaven-defying alliance had a lot more people, it was still useless. After all, the cultivation bases of the disciples of the Sword Reverse Alliance were too low. There were very few immortal emperors among them. In front of the experts of Swords Gate, they were as weak as ants. There was no way they could do anything to the Sword Reverse Alliance. Outside Tong City, the battle between the Sword Defiance Alliance and the Sword Sect had already begun. Meanwhile, in Tong City, the various major forces, including the many rogue cultivators, had also received the news. When they heard that the experts from the Sword Sect had arrived, the local forces of the Sword Sect were not surprised. After all, they had a deep understanding of the Sword Sect and the strength of the Sword Sect. However, many of the rogue cultivators who came from the outside could not remain calm. When they heard that the Sword Gate had actually sent out 10 sword head elders and over 100 ordinary elders who had reached the comprehension stage, many of the loose cultivators were stunned. There were even some who unconsciously opened their mouths and muttered, 10 Dao realm experts and more than 100 enlightenment realm experts. The strength of the Sword Sect. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. End of chapter. Chapter 2173. The fact that the Sword Sect had sent out so many experts at once was beyond the expectations of these rogue cultivators. After all, Dao Realm experts were already top-notch figures in their eyes. In the Sword Reverse Alliance, aside from Wu Qinfeng, there were only 2 other Dao Realm experts. As for the rogue cultivators, including Wang Wu, there were only 3 Dao Realm experts. However, the Sword Sect had actually sent out 10 Dao Realm experts at once. Everyone looked at Wang Wu in shock. Some of them couldn't help but ask, "Senior Wang Wu, does this mean that the Sword Sect didn't send out a single vice sect master?" Judging from the current situation, Swords Gate didn't even have a single vice headmaster. They were all led by the Dao Realm elders of Swords Gate. Originally, everyone thought that even if the Sword Sect wanted to destroy the Sword Reverse Alliance, they would need at least 1 or 2 vice-sect masters. However, it seemed that they were completely wrong. The vice-sect masters of the Sword Sect didn't even look at the Sword Reverse Alliance in the eye. They didn't even put the Sword Reverse Alliance in their eyes. Hearing these people's shocked questions, Wang Mu smiled and said, "That's why I said that you guys think too highly of the Sword Defiance Alliance. It's just a motley crew. How could the vice-sect lords personally act?" The vice-sect masters wouldn't personally take action against the Sword Reverse Alliance. This was because even if they won, the Sword Reverse Alliance would be degrading. Secondly, the Sword Sect didn't put the Sword Reverse Alliance in their eyes at all. Following Wang Wu's words, everyone fell silent. At the same time, their fear of the Sword Sect rose exponentially. At the same time, outside of Tong City, at the Lingnan sect's encampment, the battle had completely broken out. However, in the face of the many experts of the Sword Sect, the disciples of the Sword Reverse Alliance were slaughtered like vegetables. There was a huge disparity in numbers, but there was also a huge disparity in strength. It must be known that among the 10 or so sects in the Sword Defiance Alliance, most of them only had Comprehension Realm experts as their strongest. As for the Sword Sect's side, the weakest of the 100 or so people who had descended this time was in the Enlightenment Realm, let alone Zhao Yu and the other 3 Dao Realm experts. They were simply existences that could destroy the world. It was almost a one-sided massacre. At this moment, Wu Qinfeng, who was fighting fiercely with Zhao Yu, finally woke up and realized how foolish and ignorant everything he had done before was. They actually dared to think that they could contend against the Sword Sect with the alliance of more than 10 sections. This was simply wishful thinking. At this moment, Wu Qinfeng finally understood why the Sword Sect hadn't said anything when they had formed the Reverse Sword Alliance. It wasn't because the Sword Sect was afraid, nor was it because the Sword Sect was afraid of them. It was because they didn't care about the Sword Defiance Alliance at all. At this moment, groups of Sword Defiance Alliance disciples were being slaughtered by the Sword Sect's experts. Blood had long dyed the ground red, and screams and pleas for mercy were endless. The Sword Sect's sect master and vice-sect master didn't even show up. Just these people alone were enough to completely defeat the Sword Defiance Alliance. Not only Wu Qinfeng, but the other sect masters also realized this point. At the same time, they personally experienced the terror of the Sword Sect. It was fine if they didn't make a move, but once they did, they left no room for a comeback. The unparalleled Tang Sekfo at this moment, Wu Qinfeng and the other sect masters finally realized why the Sword Sect could stand on equal footing with the 10 great Ling Tian sects, why they could contend against the Heavenly Sect, and why the Heavenly Sect couldn't do anything to the Sword Sect. It was because the Sword Sect did indeed have such strength. It turned out that they had been provoking a powerful force that could contend with the 10 great Ling Tian sect. They couldn't fight them head-on. When he thought of this, Wu Qinfeng retreated as he fought, looking for an opportunity to escape. As for what Wu Qinfeng was thinking, Zhao Yu immediately guessed it. He sneered and said, "Don't you think you're too naive to think that you can escape now?" As he spoke, Zhao Yu's attacks became even more violent. He held Wu Qinfeng back tightly, not giving Wu Qinfeng any chance to escape. Wu Qinfeng couldn't escape at all as he was held back by Zhao Yu. On the other hand, the other sect masters were not as strong as Wu Qinfeng. At this moment, more than half of them had been killed by the Sword Sect's powerhouses. Meanwhile, a sect master who also had a Dao realm cultivation base like Wu Qinfeng was fighting fiercely with Qianling. However, his cultivation base was only at the Mastery Dao realm, so he was naturally no match for Qianling. After a short few dozen moves, the sect master was completely at a disadvantage. At the same time, he also suffered quite a few injuries. He held on bitterly, but at the same time, he was filled with regret. At this moment, the sect master looked at Qianling and begged for mercy. "I surrender. I'm willing to surrender. I'm willing to pledge allegiance to the Sword Sect." At this point, the sect master expressed his willingness to pledge allegiance to the sword sect. However, Qianling didn't hesitate and coldly rejected him. It's too late now. Xiao Chun had given them a chance to choose and gave them enough time to think. However, the answer they gave wasn't to pledge allegiance. Instead, they disobeyed Xiao Chen's orders and even wanted to join forces to fight against the sword sect. The sword sect naturally wouldn't accept these people. Qianling knew this very well. Without giving the sect master a chance to beg for mercy, Qianling stabbed out with his sword. Then, a gust of wind that was as sharp as blades transformed into numerous blades that instantly enveloped the sect master. Enveloped by the gust of wind blades, the sect master desperately resisted. However, his defense was quickly torn apart inch by inch. Then, deep wounds appeared on his body. In the end, the sect master was directly torn into pieces by the gust of wind blades. After successfully killing the sect master, Qianling looked at Zhao Yu, who was still fighting fiercely with Wu Qinfeng. In the sword reverse alliance, Wu Qinfeng was undoubtedly the strongest. Therefore, he was still fighting fiercely with Zhao Yu. Seeing this scene, Qianling revealed a faint smile and said, "Zhao Yu, can you do it? If you can't, then let's have someone else." On the battlefield, Qianling still had the time to joke. However, when Zhao Yu heard his words, he shouted with a displeased expression, "Go away." Zhao Yu didn't need Qianling's help at all. Although Wu Qinfeng was also a complete Dao realm warrior, there was still a gap between their combat strengths in the same realm. Moreover, Zhao Yu was the sword elder of the sword sect. The various cultivation resources that he usually enjoyed were the best in the Great Thousand World. Naturally, Wu Qinfeng couldn't be compared to him. Chapter 2174. Wu Qinfeng was infuriated that Zhao Yu was still in the mood to tease Qianling in the midst of a fierce battle. However, Wu Qinfeng wasn't a fool. Judging from the current situation, Wu Qinfeng knew very well that he would die if he stayed. Wu Qinfeng was infuriated that Zhao Yu was still in the mood to tease Qianling in the midst of a fierce battle. However, Wu Qinfeng wasn't a fool either. Wu Qinfeng knew very well that he would die if he stayed. Apart from Zhao Yu, almost all of the 10 sword leaders of the sword sect had ended their battles. Facing 4 Dao realm experts at the same time, even if Wu Qinfeng lost his mind, he wouldn't think that he had any chance of winning. Therefore, while Zhao Yu and Qianling were teasing each other, Wu Qinfeng didn't hesitate to turn around and flee. Seeing that Wu Qinfeng had chosen to escape, Zhao Yu did not panic at all. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "Didn't this old man say that trying to escape now is too laughable?" Zhao Yu didn't seem to make any movements, but his entire body seemed to distort and gradually dissipated on the spot. Zhao Yu's body disappeared into thin air. He did not tear the void apart, nor did he use any movement martial skill. This method of Zhao Yu's was indeed extremely strange. As Qianling watched Zhao Yu disappear into the distance, he revealed a smile and said, "That idiot." He actually thought of escaping from Zhao Yu's hand. Qianling seemed to be very confident in Zhao Yu and didn't think that Wu Qinfeng could escape from him. The truth was indeed so. Although Wu Qinfeng was extremely sharp and had grasped the opportunity to flee far away in a flash, before he had the time to rejoice, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. When he focused his eyes, it was actually Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu had obviously arrived here first, waiting for Wu Qinfeng's arrival. Seeing that Zhao Yu had actually blocked his path, Wu Qinfeng's expression changed greatly, and he said with a face of disbelief, "How is this possible?" Wu Qinfeng couldn't believe that Zhao Yu would appear in front of him first. His eyes were filled with fear. At the same time, Zhao Yu said lightly, "Why are you surprised? Actually, it's nothing much. This old man is the second person in the sword sect to comprehend the law of space after the ancestor. Therefore, catching up to you is as easy as flipping my hand." The law of space? Hearing Zhao Yu's words, Wu Qinfeng immediately lost his temper. At the same time, he knew very well that there was no chance for him to escape alive today. In front of Zhao Yu, who had comprehended the laws of space, Wu Qinfeng had no chance of escaping. Who would have thought that Zhao Yu would be able to comprehend the law of space? In the entire sword sect, apart from the ancestor Junwia, Zhao Yu was probably the only one who had comprehended the law of space. Even among the deputy sect leaders, no one had comprehended the law of space. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhao Yu gently swung the long sword in his hand. He then looked at Wu Qinfeng and said indifferently, "All right, enough nonsense. It's time to send you on your way." After saying that, Zhao Yu took a step forward, and his figure instantly disappeared from the spot. Not even a trace of his aura was left behind. In an instant, they lost track of Zhao Yu. This was the law of space. It allowed one to become one with space for a short period of time and almost achieve the effect of invisibility. Completely unable to catch Zhao Yu's whereabouts, Wu Qinfeng's forehead and back were already covered with thick beads of sweat. He didn't know and couldn't be sure where Zhao Yu would suddenly attack from in the next second. Wu Qinfeng didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless, but he didn't have the slightest way to deal with it. As for escaping, he didn't even need to think about it. A cultivator who had comprehended the law of space was definitely at the top of his level in terms of speed. Wu Qinfeng simply didn't have the ability to get rid of Zhao Yu. Time passed slowly. In this kind of torment, Wu Qinfeng became more and more anxious. After all, waiting for death was the most difficult thing for a person. Just as Wu Qinfeng completely lost his patience, a sword appeared in front of Wu Qinfeng without any warning. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The person holding the sword couldn't be seen. Only a long sword could be seen piercing through Wu Qinfeng's heart at lightning speed. After Zhao Yu's sword successfully killed Wu Qinfeng, Zhao Yu's figure finally appeared in front of Wu Qinfeng. Looking at Zhao Yu in front of him, Wu Qinfeng muttered to himself, "Why, you?" Why, Wu Qinfeng was obviously a little unwilling. He and Zhao Yu were both at the great circle of Dao realm, but in front of Zhao Yu, he couldn't even block a single sword strike and was easily killed by Zhao Yu. Wu Qinfeng didn't finish his words because he had no strength left. However, Zhao Yu still said indifferently, "Because I'm the sword head of the sword sect, and you're just an ant that can't even get on the stage. So even if our cultivation is the same, you're still not my match." After saying that, Zhao Yu sheathed his sword, and Wu Qinfeng died on the spot. After killing Wu Qinfeng, Zhao Yu cut off his head and returned to the Lingnan sect's temporary base. When Zhao Yu returned, the battle here was nearing its end. Most of the Sword Defiance Alliance's disciples had been killed, and only a few had managed to escape. Moreover, most of them were on unimportant missions. The sect leader, elders, and experts of the sword sect were not spared. The ground was littered with corpses, and blood had already gathered into a river. Not long after, the battle was completely over. Zhao Yu and the others immediately returned to Tong City to meet with Xiao Chen, Song Xing, and the others. In the back garden of Tong City's City Lord Mansion, Zhao Yu and the others saw Xiao Chen, Song Xing, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan. Zhao Yu respectfully saluted them. "Greetings, sect leader and vice-sect leader. The Sword Defiance Alliance has been destroyed, and only a few people managed to escape." Hearing Zhao Yu's words, Xiao Chen smiled casually. "Thank you for your hard work. Sit." Hearing this, Zhao Yu and the others sat down. After that, Xiao Chen did not ask anything about the Sword Defiance Alliance. Even when he saw Wu Qinfeng's head, Xiao Chen only glanced at it indifferently. Obviously, in Xiao Chen's heart, the Sword Defiance Alliance was not worth mentioning, and there was no need for him to pay too much attention to it. Moreover, the result was within reason, so there was no need for him to pay too much attention to it. At this point, the matter seemed to have come to an end silently. The Sword Defiance Alliance, a laughable and lamentable alliance, had been completely destroyed before it had even been formally established. It did not even cause a ripple. Everyone sat together in a circle, and Shao Chen slowly said, "The situation in the Sword Mansion must be stabilized as soon as possible. Song Xing and Nangong Guan will be fully responsible for the matters of the Martial Arts Academy. I hope that it can be carried out as soon as possible. You should know that we don't have much time to waste. The Heavenly Gate is our main target. Please add this to your collection, monthly votes and recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2175. When Shao Chen mentioned the Heavenly Sect, everyone present nodded in agreement. Indeed, to the Sword Sect, the so-called Reverse Sword Alliance was not worth mentioning at all. The real enemy of the Sword Sect was the Heavenly Sect, and the Sword Sect had no way to avoid the final battle with the Heavenly Sect. Although the Heavenly Sect and Yang Chen did not seem to have any special movements during this period of time, it would be a big mistake to think that this was the case. The Heavenly Sect and Yang Chen were definitely preparing for the final battle. Similarly, Shao Chen and the Sword Sect were doing the same. Shao Chen handed over the matter of the Martial Arts Academy to Song Xing and Nangong Guan. Shao Chen had also discussed the concept of the Martial Arts Academy with the two of them in detail. He believed that there would be no problem in handing it over to the two of them. The next day, Shao Chen led the members of the Sword Sect out of Tong City and returned to the Sword Sect. As for Nangong Guan and Song Xing, they stayed behind. After all, the two of them were going to set up the Martial Arts Academy system that Shao Chen hoped for in the Sword Mansion. This would allow many ordinary people to have the opportunity to cultivate. Shao Chen and his group returned to the Sword Sect safely. Half a month later, the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect regained their peace. Regardless of whether it was the Sword Sect or the Heavenly Sect, they did not take the initiative to find trouble with each other. It was rare for them to enjoy a trace of peace. However, the Great Thousand World could be said to be troubled times. Just as the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect had calmed down, another piece of news exploded like thunder and quickly spread throughout the Great Thousand World. Enlitian, who had returned from the Wood World, appeared again. This time, Enlitian and Xing appeared in the 10,000 weapon residence of the Equipment Sect and gradually formed a faction called the Heavenly Tower. The high-profile appearance of Yuli Tian naturally caused a strong reaction from the Heavenly Policy Hall. It could be said that the Heavenly Policy Hall viewed Yuli Tian as their mortal enemy. It was similar to the relationship between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Combined Gate. Previously, Enlitian had used the mountain river diagram to escape with Xing. Then, he disappeared. The Heavenly Policy Mansion searched for him for a long time and spent a lot of effort, but they still couldn't find Enlitian. Now that Yuli Tian had appeared in such a high-profile manner, and it seemed that he had the support of the Tool Sect, he had openly established the Heavenly Tower in the Myriad Weapon Residence. In the Sword Sect, Shao Chen also heard about Enlitian. A strange look flashed through his eyes as he muttered softly, "Is it really just a coincidence that Enlitian and his disciple appeared at this time?" The timing of the lunar day's appearance was too unusual, and Shao Chen could sense a hint of danger from it. Upon hearing Shao Chen's words, Zhou Song was a little puzzled and asked, "Junior brother, do you mean that Enlitian is plotting something?" "I can't say for sure yet, but does senior brother know the current situation of the Great Thousand World?" Shao Chen shook his head gently. When Shao Chen asked Zhou Song about the current situation of the Great Thousand World, Zhou Song didn't respond for a moment. Upon seeing this, Shao Chen said, as if he was talking to himself, "The Great Thousand World's ancestor emperors have gone to Tenzu. In other words, there are no emperors in the Great Thousand World now." For Enlitian to suddenly appear in such a high-profile manner at this time, there were no emperors in the Great Thousand World. The emperors, such as Junwia, had gone to meet Tenzu. The impact of Yin Litian's appearance at this time was self-evident. In the current Great Thousand World, no one could suppress Yin Litian, at least before the Emperor's returned. In other words, no one could stop Yin Litian from doing whatever he wanted during this period of time. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song's expression changed abruptly. He then asked in disbelief, "Junior brother, do you mean that Yin Litian wants to take advantage of this opportunity to take over the Great Thousand World? That won't happen. Yin Litian is not a fool. He knows that the Great Thousand World is not something he can take over. However, it's not impossible for him to take advantage of this opportunity to deal with the Heavenly Policy Hall," Xiao Chen said with a solemn expression. Yin Litian had every reason and motive to take action against the Heavenly Policy Hall. Moreover, this was the best opportunity. Without Li Xiao, no one in the Heavenly Policy Hall could resist Yin Litian. Even if he couldn't completely destroy the Heavenly Policy Hall, he could at least deal a devastating blow to them. Thinking of this, Xiao Chun took out a voice transmission talisman and sent a message to Li Chun, telling him to be careful of Yin Litian. Since Yin Litian had appeared at this time, it was definitely not as simple as it seemed. Xiao Chun told Li Chun about his concerns. As for how Li Chun would react, he naturally couldn't control it. However, given Li Chun's character, he should understand his concerns. Xiao Chun didn't have a very close relationship with the Heavenly Policy Hall, but they could at least be considered friends. Therefore, between Yin Litian and the Heavenly Policy Hall, Xiao Chen would definitely choose the Heavenly Policy Hall. Li Chun, who was in the Heavenly Policy Hall, received Xiao Chen's message immediately. He had been worried about Yin Litian for the past few days. Now that he received Xiao Chen's message, Li Chun's mood became even heavier. Li Chun and an elder of the Heavenly Policy Hall sat opposite each other on the mountain peak in the cave dwelling. When he saw someone sending a message to Li Chun, the elder asked, "Hall Master, it's from the Sword Sect Master, Xiao Chen. He warned me to be careful of Yin Litian. It is very likely that Yin Litian will attack the Heavenly Policy Hall when the sovereigns are not around," Li Chun replied truthfully without hiding anything. Hearing Li Chun's words, the Heavenly Policy Hall's elder's expression became extremely solemn. They were also discussing the matter of Yin Litian just now. The result of their speculation coincided with Xiao Chen's. Since even an outsider like Xiao Chen could see the danger that the Heavenly Policy Hall was in, the situation probably didn't allow the Heavenly Policy Hall to be lucky or be careless. A solemn look flashed across their eyes. After which, Li Chun spoke in a somewhat low voice. "Pass down the order. Get everyone outside to return to the sect and activate the sect's great array. No one is allowed to take half a step out of the sect until Master returns." If they wanted to fight against Yin Litian, they could only wait until Li Xiao returned from Tenzu. Before that, all Li Chun could do was to defend. However, although Li Chun had already sent a message to Li Xiao hadn't replied until now. Li Chun didn't know when Li Xiao would return and whether Yin Litian would attack the Heavenly Policy Hall. The Heavenly Policy Hall entered a state of full alert. The sect's great formation was immediately activated. The many students and elders outside returned one after another, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2176. Due to the high-profile appearance of Yin Litian and his disciple, Li Chun immediately ordered the Heavenly Policy Mansion to enter a state of high alert. The protective array was also fully activated. Due to the high-profile appearance of Yin Litian and his disciple, Li Chun immediately ordered the Heavenly Policy Mansion to enter a state of high alert. The protective array was also fully activated. However, to everyone's surprise, Yin Litian and his disciple did not have any intention of making a move even after half a month had passed. It was as though they were not interested in the Heavenly Policy Mansion at all. However, there was one thing that was worth noting. The heavenly Een Tower's influence in the 10,000 weapon mansion was getting bigger and bigger. In just half a month, they had already swallowed more than half of the forces in the 10,000 weapon mansion. Many experts had joined the heavenly Een Tower. At the same time, many sects and clans in the 10,000 weapon mansion had also become the heavenly Een Tower's subsidiary forces. However, there was no reaction in the face of the crazy expansion of the heavenly Een Tower. It was as though they were letting it happen. Since they did not show up, there was no need for them to stop the heavenly Een Tower. Logically speaking, as the overlord of the 10,000 weapon mansion, how could the equipment refining sect allow the heavenly Een Tower to expand so brazenly in their own territory? In just half a month, the heavenly Een Tower could almost compete with the equipment refining sect in the 10,000 weapon mansion with the tacit consent of the equipment refining sect. The situation in the 10,000 weapon mansion was very strange. The behavior of the equipment refining sect was even more puzzling. However, although all the major forces had placed their attention on the 10,000 weapon mansion, no one knew the real reason behind the abnormal behavior of the equipment refining sect. Meanwhile, in the weapon refining sect's headquarters in the 10,000 weapons mansion, a scene that no one could have imagined was playing out. In the main hall of the equipment refining sect, Een Litian, who was supposed to be the sect leader of the equipment refining sect, was sitting on the main seat. Below him, 7 or 8 vice-sect leaders of the equipment refining sect were standing respectfully. Een Litian's appearance in the equipment refining sect was already very strange. Moreover, the sect leader of the equipment refining sect seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. At the same time, at least half of the vice-sect leaders of the equipment refining sect had also mysteriously disappeared. Only 7 or 8 people were left in front of Een Litian. However, these 7 or 8 people were now standing respectfully in front of Een Litian. Een Litian looked at everyone present and said faintly, "Everyone has obeyed me. Naturally, I will not treat you unfairly. Everything will be the same as before," Een Litian said in an indifferent voice. Upon hearing this, the 7 to 8 weapon refining sect vice-sect masters respectfully bowed and replied, "The equipment refining sect leader of the equipment refining sect." Very soon, the spies that the Sword Gate and the other major factions had sent to the 1,000 weapon mansion continuously sent back new information. News that the sect leader of the armaments sect had been missing for many days quickly reached the ears of Xiao Chen and the rest. After receiving this news, coupled with the recent abnormal behavior of the equipment refining sect and the heavenly Een Tower, Xiao Chen quickly guessed what had happened. Xiao Chen was sitting in the courtyard in the cave residence. He had just finished his training when he received the news. His eyes flashed with a strange look. Everyone is wrong. Een Litian and his disciples' target is not the heavenly policy mansion, but the equipment refining sect. Xiao Chen quickly reacted. Een Litian and his disciples' appearance in the 10,000 weapon mansion had nothing to do with the equipment refining sect. Een Litian had probably already secretly taken control of the equipment refining sect before the two of them appeared. After all, there was no Emperor Realm Master in charge, and the equipment refining sect was defenseless. The equipment refining sect would not be able to stop Een Litian and his disciple. Moreover, with Een Litian's strength and the strange power of the mountain and river diagram, it would be easy for him to sneak into the equipment refining sect and kill the equipment refining sect leader. According to Xiao Chen's guess, Een Litian and his disciple had been hiding in the 10,000 weapon mansion after they disappeared, waiting for an opportunity. After the sovereigns left, Een Litian snuck into the tool refining sect with the help of the mountain and river diagram. He might have killed or imprisoned the sect master of the tool refining sect. Then, he slowly took control of the entire tool refining sect and killed all those who did not obey him. According to Xiao Chen's guess, the equipment refining sect was now completely under Een Litian's control. As for the equipment refining sect leader, he was most likely dead. This was because Enlitian would never let the equipment refining sect leader live. Enlitian had come up with a plan long ago, and no one in the Great Thousand World had expected that he would target the equipment refining sect. The situation in the 10,000 Weapon Mansion was gradually becoming obvious, but the major sects in the Great Thousand World remained silent, which was rare. They had no choice. Now that the emperors were not in the Great Thousand World, no one wanted to offend Enlitian at this time. Of course, there was only one force, Dan Valley, that sent people to the 10,000 Weapon Mansion to investigate. The Dan Valley and the equipment refining sect had a good relationship, and the two sects had almost always maintained an alliance. After learning about the current situation in the equipment refining sect, as the new Valley Master of the Dan Valley, Dan Xin, naturally could not sit back and do nothing. However, because Dan Qingyang was not in the Dan Valley, Dan Xin did not dare to take any drastic action. He could only send people to the 10,000 Weapon Mansion again to investigate. It would be best if he could find out what had happened in the equipment refining sect. In Dan Xin's cave residence in the Dan Valley, Dan Xin was in a bad mood these days. He had been angry about the equipment refining sect. At the same time, as more and more information came in, Dan Xin became more and more certain that the equipment refining sect must have undergone a great change. The entire equipment refining sect had most likely fallen into the hands of Enlitian and his disciple. With a gloomy face, Dan Xin scolded fiercely. Enlitian, you're courting death. Dan Xin was extremely irritated at the thought that his good friend might have met with a mishap. Facing the somewhat furious Dan Xin, a deputy Valley Master of the Dan Valley beside him also spoke in a low voice. Valley Master, now is not the time. Once there is a conflict with Enlitian, we will be the ones to suffer. Everything should wait for the ancestor to come back and discuss at length. Without Dan Qingyang, the Dan Valley obviously would not end well if they provoked Enlitian at this time. Dan Xin also knew this very well. Therefore, even though he was furious, Dan Xin still suppressed the anger in his heart and did not take the initiative to provoke Enlitian and his disciple. Instead, he waited for Dan Qingyang to return. However, Dan Xin also knew that even if Dan Qingyang returned, he would not be a match for Enlitian in terms of battle strength. After all, Dan Qingyang's battle strength was almost at the bottom among the sovereigns. Of course, the same was true for the equipment refining sect's ancestor. What's more, Enlitian now had the mountain and river diagram in his hand, which made him even more difficult to deal with. Please add this to your collection. Monthly vote recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 2177. Naturally, Dan Xin had heard of the mountain and river diagram. Back then, the three emperors, Jun Wuya, Dao Xiong, and Li Shao, wanted to join forces to kill Enlitian, but Enlitian managed to escape in the end. This proved that Enlitian, who possessed the mountain and river diagram, was not easy to deal with. Dan Xin sighed helplessly. At this moment, he felt a strong sense of powerlessness. Facing Enlitian and his disciple, Dan Xin did not know what to do. In addition, there were many things happening in the Great Thousand World. As the situation of the equipment refining sect became clearer, the other 10 great Ling Tian sects had not expressed their stance. Everyone had been watching coldly from the sidelines. The situation of the equipment refining sect became clearer. As time passed, the entire 10,000 Weapon Mansion was almost occupied by the Heavenly Een Tower. Thinking about it, it was not difficult for the Heavenly Een Tower to occupy the 10,000 Weapon Mansion since they secretly controlled the equipment refining sect. After the 10,000 Weapon Mansion was completely occupied by the Heavenly Een Tower, on this day, no one knew that Enlitian had secretly left the equipment refining sect and was rushing to the place where Tenzu was. As an emperor, Enlitian naturally knew where Tenzu was. In fact, He had set off this time to intercept and kill the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect. As long as he killed the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect, the equipment refining sect would be truly destroyed. At that time, the heavenly Een Tower could directly replace the equipment refining sect and become one of the 10 great Ling Tian sect. This was Een Litian's real purpose. Een Litian secretly left the 10,000 weapon mansion and went to the route that the equipment refining sect's old ancestor must pass by to wait for the ambush. At the same time, in the endless starry sky outside the Great Thousand World, a small continent, like an isolated island floating on the sea, was floating alone in the dark starry sky. This was the residence of the heavenly ancestor. Apart from the time in the great wide world, the heavenly ancestor basically lived here. On this isolated island, there were many living beings created by the heavenly ancestor. Although they did not have cultivation, this isolated island looked extremely peaceful. There were small villages scattered all over the island, and the people here still adhered to the most primitive and natural living habits. They worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. The men plowed and the women weaved. Their days were peaceful and peaceful. Although these people might not know that there was a wider world and more exciting world outside of this isolated island, it was not difficult to see from these people's simple smiles that they felt very happy living here. At least, there were no disputes, wars, and they did not have to worry about being killed by others. And in the center of the island, beside a small lake, there was a simple thatched hut. This was the residence of the heavenly ancestor. With a head full of silver hair and eyes full of kindness, he sat on the main seat. This was the will of the heavenly way, who was in charge of the great thousand world. At the same time, he was also the father of all the will of the heavenly way. He was known by the world as Tenzu. At first glance, he was a very kind and amiable old man. On both sides of the heavenly way's seat were Junwuya and the other sovereigns who had rushed over from the great thousand world. Everyone sat together, drinking tea and drinking wine. The atmosphere was quite relaxed, and under such a relaxed atmosphere they discussed many things. Time really flies. In the blink of an eye you've all grown old, Tenzu said with a smile as he looked at the crowd. Tenzu did not wait for anyone to reply and changed the topic. However, the change of era means that the great thousand world will be in chaos for a while. This is also a manifestation of the laws of heaven and earth, isn't it? Otherwise, if we old fellows are always in charge, how can the great thousand world make any progress? Junwuya took a sip of wine and said with a chuckle. Chaos was inevitable under the change of the old and new eras. This could not be helped, but even so, the torrent of eras would still roll forward and would not stop because of this. After hearing Junwuya's words, the smile on Tenzu's face did not diminish. Yes, this is also a manifestation of the laws of heaven and earth. No one can stop it. Tenzu agreed with Junwuya's words very much, so he did not think of stopping anything from beginning to end. In fact, ever since Tenzu was born, he had almost never paid attention to the matters of the great thousand world. Unless there was a situation that concerned the survival of the great thousand world, or someone had threatened the existence of the great thousand world. Under such circumstances, Tenzu would directly intervene in the development of the situation. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, Tenzu would not casually intervene in the affairs of the great thousand world. Even if the major forces fought among themselves, Tenzu would not be willing to step in, let alone take sides. It was precisely because of this that the relationship between the heavenly ancestor and the emperors was so harmonious, and the emperors showed enough respect to the heavenly ancestor. This time, Tenzu did not gather the emperors for any special reason. It was mainly about the change of the old and new eras. However, outsiders naturally did not know what was said between them. The flow of time on the isolated island where Tenzu was located was completely different from the flow of time in the great thousand world. Therefore, the crowd had only stayed here for less than a day, But almost a year had passed in the Great Thousand World. Everything that needed to be said had been said, and when it was time to leave, the emperors got up and said goodbye one after another. However, before leaving, Tenzu suddenly called out to the tool refining sect's old ancestor. Hearing Tenzu's voice, the tool refining sect's old ancestor turned around and looked at Tenzu with some confusion. In this regard, Tenzu only said one sentence in the end. "Take care, old man." It seemed that Tenzu had said something that was somewhat confusing, but after hearing this, the tool refining sect's old ancestor was stunned for a moment, then seemed to understand. "In fact, your isolated island is not bad. If there is a chance, I would also like to live here. At least it's very quiet." After saying that, the tool refining sect's old ancestor turned around and left. Looking at his back, Tenzu's expression was calm, but there was a flash of emotion in his eyes. He did not know if the tool refining sect's old ancestor could return to the tool refining sect safely this time, but in Tenzu's opinion, it would be very difficult, because there were already people waiting for him halfway. After leaving Tenzu's place, the emperors returned to the Great Thousand World one after another. On the way back, as soon as the tool refining sect's old ancestor entered the Great Thousand World, the figure of Enlitian slowly appeared in front of him. Seeing Enlitian, the tool refining sect's old ancestor was taken aback for a moment, then he laughed self-deprecatingly. "Enlitian, you made a special trip here. Don't tell me you're here to chat with this old man? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2178. The tool sect's old ancestor and Enlitian were naturally acquainted with each other, as they had met many years ago. Hearing the tool sect's old ancestor's words, Enlitian smiled noncommittally. "Of course not, I have a request." The tool sect's old ancestor and Enlitian were naturally acquainted with each other, as they had met many years ago. Hearing the tool sect's old ancestor's words, Enlitian smiled noncommittally. "Of course not, I have a request." Enlitian claimed that he had a request. Hearing this, the tool sect's old ancestor sneered. "You have a request? Naturally, I would like to borrow your life." Enlitian also sneered upon hearing those words. Enlitian's murderous intent was no longer held back. Sensing Enlitian's murderous intent, the tool sect's old ancestor did not show the slightest fear. After all, as an emperor and having lived for so many years, the tool sect's old ancestor had long been able to conceal his emotions. He looked calmly at Enlitian. Enlitian did not speak any more nonsense. He took a step forward and his figure instantly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the tool sect's old ancestor. He threw a punch directly at the tool sect's old ancestor. The purpose of Enlitian's appearance here was to kill the tool sect's old ancestor, so there was nothing much to say when the two met. At the same time, facing Enlitian's attack, the tool sect's old ancestor did not hesitate and directly counterattacked. In the empty wasteland, the two emperors fought fiercely. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged hundreds of blows. In the beginning, the two could be said to be evenly matched. After all, they were both emperors, so it was not an easy task for either of them to defeat the other. However, as time passed, after more than half a day of fierce fighting, the tool sect's old ancestor slowly showed a trace of fatigue. Like Dan Qingyang, the tool sect's old ancestor was not an emperor who relied on his battle prowess. Therefore, in terms of pure battle prowess, the tool sect's old ancestor did not have any advantage. Perhaps this was the reason why Enlitian targeted the tool sect's old ancestor. After all, it was very difficult for Enlitian to kill sovereigns like Jun Huia and Li Shao, but it was much easier to kill sovereigns like the tool sect's old ancestor and Dan Qingyang, who were not known for their combat strength. After gradually gaining the upper hand, Enlitian's attacks became more and more ferocious, and it seemed like he wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. In the face of Litian's ferocious attacks, the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect seemed to have predicted his own outcome. However, at his age, he had already become indifferent to Sueyu's life and death. The only thing that the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect could not let go of was the entire equipment refining sect. Moreover, since Litian could appear here, it naturally meant that the equipment refining sect was under his control. From now on, the equipment refining sect would no longer exist in the Great Thousand World. Fighting Litian with all his might, the Tool Sect's patriarch shouted coldly, "I should have joined hands with Li Xiao to kill you, Litian." If the Tool Sect's patriarch had known that this day would come, he would have joined hands with Li Xiao to kill Litian directly. Hearing the Tool Sect's patriarch's words, Litian smiled coldly. "Unfortunately, there are no ifs in this world, and you won't have the chance to do so again." With that, Litian's heart moved, and a painting scroll slowly condensed behind him. Seeing this painting scroll, the Tool Sect's patriarch's face changed greatly for the first time, and he said in a low voice, "The Mountain River painting. Haha, it seems that you still remember it. Not bad, you should be glad that it is in the hands of the Mountain River painting. After all, you also participated in the refining of the Mountain River painting back then," Litian sneered. Others might not know, but Litian knew very well that the Mountain River painting was refined by his master and the equipment refining sect's old ancestor. The equipment refining sect's old ancestor had indeed helped a lot in the process of refining the Mountain River painting. Because he had personally participated in the refining of the Mountain River painting, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor knew how terrifying the Mountain River painting was. Teleportation was just one of the abilities of the Mountain River painting. As one of the few supreme treasures in the Great Thousand World, the Mountain River painting's ability was far more than that. As the Mountain River painting slowly opened behind Litian, a faint golden light was emitted from the painting scroll, and it instantly enveloped the body of the equipment refining sect's old ancestor. Being enveloped by the golden light, a terrifying suction force suddenly sucked the equipment refining sect's old ancestor into the Mountain River painting. At the same time, Litian also flew into the painting scroll. Both of them entered the Mountain River painting at the same time. In the Mountain River painting, Litian and the equipment refining sect's old ancestor continued to fight, and the surrounding environment remained unchanged, as if both of them were still in the Great Thousand World. However, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor knew that both of them were now in the world of the painting, and Litian could control everything in the painting. As Litian's heart moved, the surrounding mountains seemed to have received some kind of order, and they continued to attack the equipment refining sect's old ancestor. At the same time, a dense rain of arrows appeared in the sky. Litian had completely refined the Mountain River painting, and he had also successfully displayed the terrifying power of the Mountain River painting. In the Mountain River painting, Litian was like a deity. He could control everything here. The equipment refining sect's old ancestor, who was no match for Litian, found it even more difficult to resist. Soon, the injuries on his body became more and more serious. In the end, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor was directly hit by a huge mountain, and he was immediately suppressed. Although the ancestor of the equipment refining sect had managed to shatter the mountain and escape with his powerful strength, the previous attack had caused him to be seriously injured, and his aura had also become weak. Looking at the equipment refining sect's old ancestor, who was already at the end of his rope, Litian sneered. "If it weren't for the Mountain River painting, it would have been difficult for me to kill you. However, in the world of the painting, you will definitely die because you have no chance to escape." In the outside world, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor could escape even if he was no match for his opponent. However, in the Mountain River painting, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor did not even have the chance to escape. With that, Litian once again mobilized the power of the mountain river painting. In an instant, numerous mountains and a rain of golden arrows once again attacked the equipment refining sect's old ancestor. In the face of such a fierce attack, although the equipment refining sect's old ancestor did not give up, the final result was already doomed. After fighting fiercely in the painting for 3 days and 3 nights, the equipment refining sect's old ancestor was finally killed by Litian. A sovereign realm master had fallen in the mountain river painting. With the death of the equipment refining sect's old ancestor, the sound of a bell rang in the great thousand world at the same time. This sound spread to every corner of the great thousand world, and everyone could hear it clearly. As for the ordinary people without cultivation, or the martial artists with insufficient cultivation, when they heard the sound of the bell, their minds seemed to be affected for some reason. They only felt extreme grief, and tears flowed unconsciously from their eyes. Please collect, vote, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 2179. The sound of the bell, which was filled with endless sorrow, resounded in every corner of the great thousand world. Everyone who heard the sound of the bell couldn't help but feel sorrowful. People could be seen crying because they were affected by the sound of the bell. For a time, the whole great thousand world was filled with sorrowful cries. In every major city, people knelt on the ground in pain. In the sword sect, Junwia, who had just returned to the sword sect, was sitting with Xiaochen. When he suddenly heard the sound of the bell, a strange look flashed across Junwuya's eyes. Soul-reaping bell. Junwuya naturally knew the origin of the bell. It was the soul-reaping bell. Every time an emperor fell, the soul-reaping bell would ring in the great thousand world. Junwuya immediately guessed that it was the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect. After all, from Xiaochen, Junwuya already knew what had happened in the great thousand world recently. He also knew about the equipment refining sect. Now that the soul-reaping bell had rung, it was obvious that the equipment refining sect's old ancestor had been killed. As for who killed the equipment refining sect's old ancestor, it wasn't difficult to guess. It had to be Litian. Hearing the sad sound of the bell, Junwuya sighed silently. He didn't expect that the equipment refining sect's old ancestor would die just like that. Moreover, with the death of the equipment refining sect's old ancestor, the destruction of the equipment refining sect was a foregone conclusion. Litian's purpose had been successfully achieved. Junwuya was indeed a little disappointed because of the death of the equipment refining sect's old ancestor, but he didn't say much. However, in the Dan Valley and the Heavenly Policy Mansion, Dan Qingyang and Li Zhao's reactions were unusually intense. Dan Qingyang and the equipment refining sect's old ancestor were good friends. Now that his old friend had died, one could imagine how Dan Qingyang felt. In the Dan Valley, Dan Qingyang was filled with grief and indignation. At the same time, on the other side, Li Zhao's face was gloomy. Li Xiao had learned the ins and outs of the matter from Li Chun. They had never thought that Litian would dare to show up in such a high-profile manner and target the equipment refining sect, intending to replace it. He was extremely arrogant. Li Xiao had been searching for the whereabouts of Litian and his disciple, but to no avail. After all, both of them possessed the mountain and river painting, and their whereabouts were hard to track. But now, Litian had shown up in the great thousand world and even destroyed the equipment refining sect. This showed that he did not take Li Xiao seriously at all. The death of a venerable emperor was indeed a major event in the great thousand world. The sound of the soul-reaping bell rang for an entire day and night. It was not until noon the next day that the sound of the bell gradually disappeared, and the people who were crying in pain slowly recovered. After the sound of the soul-reaping bell disappeared, Litian, Sheng, and many other powerful cultivators from the equipment refining sect and the heavenly Tower gathered in the main hall of the equipment refining sect. After accepting the power of the equipment refining sect, In addition to the crazy expansion of the heavenly Een Tower during this period of time, there were no less than 20 Supreme Realm cultivators in the main hall. This was the power in Een Litian's hands now, and it was enough to compete with the 10 great Lingtian sects. Still sitting on the main seat, Een Litian looked at the people below and said in a calm tone, "The old ancestor of the equipment refining sect is dead. From now on, the equipment refining sect no longer exists. I want to announce the establishment of the heavenly Een Tower and replace the equipment refining sect." The death of the old ancestor of the equipment refining sect meant that the time was ripe. The heavenly Een Tower could officially occupy the entire 10,000 weapon mansion and replace the equipment refining sect. Hearing Een Litian's words, everyone present cheered loudly. "Sect Master is mighty, Sect Master is mighty." No one objected to Een Litian's decision because those who opposed them had already been eliminated by him. At this time, whether it was the equipment refining sect or the heavenly Een Tower, they were all supporters of Een Litian and his disciple. Of course, from now on, the equipment refining sect would probably no longer exist. These experts who originally belonged to the equipment refining sect would also become members of the heavenly Een Tower, and the mountain gate of the equipment refining sect would also become the location of the heavenly Een Tower. In just a few months, Een Litian had successfully destroyed one of the 10 great Lingtian sects. Even though the equipment refining sect was careless, Een Litian's methods were indeed unexpected. It could be said that Een Litian had been preparing for a long time to destroy the equipment refining sect. From the beginning, he had secretly infiltrated the equipment refining sect, secretly controlling it, and finally killing the equipment refining sect's old ancestor. Een Litian had thought of every step. In this way there would naturally be no mistake. Now that he had succeeded, it was time to announce the establishment of the heavenly Een Tower to the world. Hearing the cheers of the people below, a faint smile appeared on Een Litian's face. After the cheers of the crowd died down, Een Litian continued. "The heavenly Een Tower has been established, but I will not be the Tower Master. Let my disciple Een Xing be the Tower Master. After all, this is the age of the young." Een Litian, like Junhuia and the other sovereigns, also gave the Tower Master position to Een Xing. As for himself, he would definitely be the old ancestor of the heavenly Een Tower. Normally, he would not care about anything and would only take action at the critical moment of life and death. Hearing Een Litian's words, the people present were not surprised. After all, such things were very common in the Great Thousand World. Hearing that Een Litian had given the Tower Master position to him, Een Xing, who was standing next to Een Litian, could not hide the excitement in his eyes. The Tower Master of the heavenly Een Tower was a position that Een Xing had been looking forward to for a long time. Een Litian seemed to have sensed Een Xing's excitement, so he turned his head and looked at him calmly. "After this, you'll have to compete with the geniuses of the Great Thousand World. Don't disappoint me again." Previously, in the Wood World, Een Xing could be said to have suffered at the hands of Shao Chen several times. Hearing Een Litian's words, a cold light flashed in Een Xing's eyes. He then said with assurance, "Master, don't worry. I will definitely not lose again." Een Xing swore that he would never lose to anyone, especially Shao Chen. Hearing this, Een Litian nodded slightly. Then, he ordered people to announce the establishment of the heavenly Een Tower and the destruction of the equipment refining sect. After the heavenly Een Tower annexed the equipment refining sect, it also became the overlord of the 10,000 weapon mansion. It had inherited the previous position of the equipment refining sect. Following this news, the entire Great Thousand World was naturally shaken. After all, the destruction and replacement of the top 10 Ling Tian sects was a major event that could not be ignored by any martial artist in the Great Thousand World. After all, this was enough to change the situation of the entire Great Thousand World. It was believed that no one would dare to take it lightly. Please add it to your collection, monthly vote, recommend it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2180. The news of the establishment of the heavenly Een Tower was like a heavy bomb that exploded in the Great Thousand World. Many forces in the Great Thousand World had different thoughts about this news, but Li Xiao was undoubtedly the most annoyed. Li Xiao had always wanted to avenge his master, and he had long regarded Een Litian as his mortal enemy. He had thought that Een Litian was already dead, but who would have thought that he had been deceived by Een Litian for so many years? Now that Een Litian had returned to the Great Thousand World, not only did Li Xiao fail to avenge his master, but he also had to watch Een Litian destroy the equipment refining sect and establish the heavenly Een Tower. In an instant, the heavenly Een Tower had become an existence that could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. After a rough estimation, the heavenly Een Tower's current strength had reached the ranks of the 10 great Lingtian sects. However, whether the heavenly Een Tower was one of the 10 great Lingtian sects was still uncertain. After all, Tenzu had not officially acknowledged it. The current situation of the heavenly Een Tower was very similar to that of the Sword sect. It had the strength to contend with the 10 great Lingtian sects, but because it had not been confirmed by Tenzu, it could not be considered one of the 10 great Lingtian sects. However, the other Lingtian sects knew very well that they could not underestimate the heavenly Een Tower because of this. Li Xiao was naturally infuriated by the rise of Yu Litian and the establishment of the heavenly Een Tower. He absolutely couldn't watch Yu Litian appear in front of him and awaken in the Great Thousand World. Li Xiao was furious. At the same time, he quickly sent a message to Jun Wuya and Luo Xing. In the Sword sect, Jun Wuya smiled helplessly when he received Li Xiao's message. Seeing this, Xiao Chen, who was sitting next to him, asked curiously, "Master, what's wrong?" In the face of Xiao Chen's question, Jun Wuya did not hide anything and replied with a bitter smile. Li Xiao sent a message saying that he hopes that I can help him kill Een Litian. Li Xiao took the initiative to ask Jun Wuya to help. Hearing this, Xiao Chen was stunned and smiled helplessly. It seemed that Li Xiao's desire to kill Yu Litian was extremely strong. He wouldn't give Yu Litian any chance at all. Jun Wuya did not hesitate to agree to Li Xiao's request. After all, with his relationship with Li Xiao, Jun Wuya had no reason to refuse. Moreover, this was the first time that Li Xiao had asked for his help. Jun Wuya wouldn't refuse. However, Jun Wuya also stated his condition. He wouldn't use the power of the Sword sect. After all, the Sword sect and the Heavenly sect were in a stalemate. If they used too much of the power of the Sword sect to deal with the heavenly Een Tower, it was very likely that the Heavenly sect would take advantage of the situation. They had to be on guard against this. Jun Wuya would only act alone. To put it bluntly, this time, Jun Wuya would help with his own identity, and not on behalf of the Sword sect. Li Xiao wasn't displeased with Jun Wuya's request because he was also aware of the current situation of the Sword sect. Jun Wuya had agreed to Li Xiao's request, and Luo Xing had also agreed. Moreover, Dan Qingyang had also taken the initiative to say that he wanted to work with Li Xiao and the other two to destroy the heavenly Een Tower. Dan Qingyang was helping his old friend, the armament sect's old ancestor. Naturally, Li Xiao wouldn't refuse. In an instant, the 4 emperors formed a united front and prepared to attack the heavenly Een Tower together. The newly established heavenly Een Tower didn't have time to rejoice for too long. In the blink of an eye, it seemed to have reached the edge of a cliff. Facing the joint attack of 4 emperors at the same time, even if Een Litian had the mountain and river diagram, it was impossible for him to win. The best outcome was to escape. However, this time, Li Xiao and the other 3 obviously came prepared. They wouldn't give Een Litian the chance to escape so easily. It seemed like the heavenly Een Tower was going to become the shortest Ling Tian sect. It had only been a few days since its establishment, and the heavenly Een Tower was going to face the attack of 4 emperors. Moreover, Li Xiao and the other three didn't give Yin Litian too much time to react. After they were done with their preparations, the four of them immediately headed towards the 10,000 weapon palace. They wanted to kill the heavenly Yin Tower in the cradle. With Jun Wuya and the other three's actions, there was naturally no wall that didn't have a crack in the world. Soon, many people knew that Li Xiao and the other three were going to destroy the heavenly Yin Tower. After knowing this, some people felt sorry for the heavenly Yin Tower. After all, it had only been established for a few days. It was indeed a little sad that it was going to be destroyed so soon. Even many of the heavenly Yin Tower's experts were panicking at this time. They weren't stupid. They knew that Yin Litian alone couldn't stop Jun Wuya and the other three. However, as the person involved, Yin Litian was extremely shocked at this time. After knowing that Li Xiao and the other three were going to kill him, Yin Litian didn't feel nervous at all. Instead, he looked relaxed as if he didn't care about Jun Wuya and the other three at all. No one knew where Yin Litian's confidence came from. However, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, 3 days passed and Jun Wuya and the other three finally arrived at the heavenly Yin Tower. The former mountain gate of the tool refining sect was now occupied by the heavenly Yin Tower. Early in the morning, Jun Wuya and the other three appeared directly in the sky above the heavenly Yin Tower. Li Xiao was even more stunned as he shouted, "Yin Litian, get out here and accept your death!" His angry roar resounded throughout the entire heavenly Yin Tower. Facing Li Xiao, Jun Wuya, and the other three emperors, the many masters in the heavenly Yin Tower all wore solemn expressions as they looked at the sky and the four emperors. Their eyes were filled with nervousness and even fear. However, compared to the nervousness of the others, Yin Litian was completely different. As soon as Li Xiao's voice fell, Yin Litian didn't dodge or hide. His figure appeared directly in front of Li Xiao and the other three with a faint smile on his face. "Junior brother, you are still the same as before. You can't keep your cool at all. You can't wait to seek revenge from your senior brother so soon? Cut the crap, Yin Litian. Today, I will kill you and avenge my master." After hearing Yin Litian's words, Li Xiao was obviously not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. He immediately shouted with overflowing killing intent. In the face of Li Xiao's murderous intent, the smile on Yin Litian's face grew even wider. His gaze swept across the four of them one by one before finally stopping at Li Xiao. He spoke at a speed that was neither fast nor slow. He said calmly, "Junior brother, I knew that you would definitely come to seek revenge, but I still dared to establish the heavenly Yin Tower so openly. Did I really not make any preparations? No wonder Master once said that although your talent is good, unfortunately, you are not shrewd enough. You can only see the surface of many things. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of this chapter. Chapter 2181. Facing four emperors at the same time, Yin Litian was not nervous at all. On the contrary, he appeared very relaxed, as if Li Xiao, Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dan Qingyang were not a threat to him at all. Hearing Yin Litian's words, the coldness in Li Xiao's eyes intensified, and he shouted coldly, "Yin Litian, stop trying to be mysterious. Today I will kill you." "Trying to be mysterious, huh? So, junior brother, even after so many years, you still haven't changed at all." Yin Litian sneered coldly upon hearing those words. As Yin Litian's voice fell, 3 spatial cracks tore open behind him. Then, Tao Ming, Yunchen, and the old ancestor of the shrines slowly walked out from them. Another 3 emperors had arrived. Seeing the 3 of them, Li Xiao's face became even more unsightly. If Li Xiao still did not know where Yin Litian's confidence came from, then he would have lived for so many years in vain. It was no wonder that Yin Litian was not nervous when facing Li Xiao and the other 3. It turned out that he already had helpers. However, the fact that Tao Ming, Yunchen, and Yunchen would lend a helping hand to Yin Litian was somewhat unexpected. After all, Tao Ming and Yun Chen were the youngest sovereigns among the current sovereigns, and there was no interaction between them and Yin Litian. As for the old ancestor of the shrines, although he might have known Yin Litian before, he would not help him. Yin Litian said that there was a hierarchy because he had already made an agreement with Tao Ming and the other three. Therefore, he was not afraid of Li Xiao, Jun Wuya, and the other three's attack. After establishing the Heavenly Yin Tower, Yin Litian naturally had to plan thoroughly if he wanted the Heavenly Yin Tower to secure its former position as the equipment refining sect. After all, he knew Li Xiao's character very well. Li Xiao wouldn't give him any chances. With the appearance of Tao Ming, Yun Chen, and the old ancestor of the shrines, Li Xiao was stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at the three and asked coldly, "Are you going to help this traitor?" Hearing Li Xiao's words, Tao Ming smiled and said, "Brother Yin and I hit it off, so it's natural for us to help each other. The structure of the Great Thousand Realms is no longer the same as before. The hatred from before should have dissipated." The great ancestor of the shrines added. Tao Ming and the old ancestor of the shrines spoke one after another. As for Yun Chen, he remained silent, but his actions spoke volumes. With the appearance of Tao Ming and Yun Chen, the situation became 4 against 4. 8 emperors gathered above the Heavenly Yin Tower, facing each other. It was no wonder why Yin Lientian had not shown any fear earlier. It turned out that he had Tao Ming's group of 3 backing him up. Naturally, Yin Lientian had nothing to worry about in a 4-on-4 situation. However, the many disciples of the Heavenly Yin Tower were very excited. After all, it was a battle between sovereigns. How lucky were they to be able to witness it with their own eyes. The battle broke out, but the most intense one was between Li Xiao and Yin Lientian. Li Xiao came with the intention of killing Yin Lientian, so his attacks were extremely ruthless. There were many times when Li Xiao would rather exchange injuries with Yin Lientian so that he could severely injure Yin Lientian and create a chance to kill him. However, compared to Li Xiao's madness, Yin Lientian appeared to be very calm. He did not fight with Li Xiao at all. Most of the time, Yin Lientian would hide as much as he could. Yin Lientian was very clear that even with the mountain and river diagram in his hand, it would be very difficult to kill Li Xiao. In that case, why should he waste his energy to fight with Li Xiao? One had to know that Li Xiao was different from the Tool sect Old Ancestor. Although the Tool sect Old Ancestor was also a sovereign, he was not known for his combat strength. However, Li Xiao was different. Li Xiao's combat strength was definitely higher than the Tool sect Old Ancestors, and he was also much younger than the Tool sect Old Ancestor. In that case, it was almost impossible for Yin Lientian to kill Li Xiao unless another sovereign joined forces. Only then would they have a chance to kill Li Xiao. However, now that the shrine's old ancestor and the others were fighting fiercely with Jun Wuya and the other two, it was naturally impossible for anyone to help Yin Lientian. Since that was the case, Yin Lientian naturally had no need to risk his life to fight with Li Xiao. Please add this to your collection, monthly votes and recommendations. Sword Master 8 Desolation chapters will continue to be updated on the website. There will be no advertisements on the website. Please add and recommend the website. If you like Sword Master 8 Desolation, please add it to your collection. Chapter 2182. Li Xiao could even take Yin Litian down with him. However, Yin Litian saw through Li Xiao's intention and naturally wouldn't let him do as he wished. Moreover, Yin Litian knew that as long as he didn't confront Li Xiao head-on, Li Xiao wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Yin Litian didn't want to kill Li Xiao because it wasn't the right time yet. He knew that it would be difficult for him to kill Li Xiao with his own strength. Yin Litian kept dodging Li Xiao's ferocious attack. Li Xiao couldn't help but shout angrily. "Yin Litian, do you not dare to fight with me? Junior brother, you know that we can't do anything to each other. Why do you have to do this?" Master has been dead for so many years. As the saying goes, you need your own brother to beat a tiger. Why don't you and I stop fighting, forget about the past, and start anew? Wouldn't that be better? Litian proposed to shake hands with Li Xiao at this moment. Li Xiao couldn't contain his anger anymore. Litian had killed his master, and now he wanted him to pretend that nothing had happened to him? In Li Xiao's opinion, Litian's words were a humiliation to him. He immediately shouted angrily, Litian, if I don't kill you in this life, I swear that I'm not a man. I must avenge my master. Litian had expected Li Xiao's reply, so he wasn't angry. He smiled and said, Junior brother, why do you have to do this? You know that you can't kill me. Moreover, I have the mountain and river diagram. You should know what this means. With the mountain and river diagram, Litian could escape even if he couldn't defeat Li Xiao. Moreover, his strength was on par with Li Xiao, so there was no need for him to escape. Seeing Litian's mocking expression, Li Xiao clenched his teeth so hard that they almost broke. His attacks were getting stronger and stronger. However, no matter how crazy Li Xiao was, he couldn't defeat Litian. This was a fact. The battle in the heavenly Tower lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. During these 3 days, the sky above the heavenly Tower looked like it was the end of the world. Although Jun Wuya and the others had sealed the surrounding space, the space had already collapsed due to their fierce battle. At the same time, the violent void storm was also rampant. At the same time, the sky had become dark and foggy, giving people the feeling that Mount Tai was pressing down on them. It was also because the space had been sealed. Otherwise, the aftermath of such violent power and the battle between the sovereigns would have been enough to destroy the heavenly Tower below in an instant. The aftermath and destruction caused by the fierce battle between the 8 sovereigns could be described as earth-shattering. There was no need to doubt this fact. The fierce battle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, but the 8 sovereigns still showed no signs of stopping, especially Li Xiao and Litian. The battle between the two was as fierce as it had been at the beginning. Time passed day by day, and the heavenly Tower became the center of attention of the entire Great Thousand World. Everyone wanted to know the final outcome of the battle between the 8 venerable sovereigns. In the end, the battle lasted for a whole month, but the battle in the heavenly Tower ended in a draw. Li Xiao and Litian were both seriously injured, but Jun Wuya and the others were not seriously injured. In the end, Li Xiao was brought back to the Heavenly Policy Mansion by Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dan Qingyang. The reason why Li Xiao and Litian were seriously injured was that Li Xiao did not care about his own life. In the fierce battle for a month, Li Xiao was like a desperate man. At first, Litian did not care much about it, but as time passed, he gradually felt that it was strenuous. In the end, both sides suffered. In the end, both Li Xiao and Litian were seriously injured. Jun Wuya, the old ancestor of the shrines, and the others chose to stop at the right time. There was no need to continue the battle. After sending Li Xiao back to the Heavenly Policy Mansion, Dan Qingyang personally treated him. After confirming that there were no major problems, Jun Wuya returned to the Sword Sect. As soon as he returned to the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen took the initiative to greet Jun Wuya and asked if he was injured in the battle. Jun Wuya shook his head, indicating that he was not. Jun Wuya was indeed not injured. In the battle with the shrines, both of them did not use their full strength. Unlike Li Xiao and Litian, they did not have to fight to the death. Xiao Chen was secretly relieved when he saw that Jun Wuya was fine. Then, after chatting with Jun Wuya for a while, Xiao Chen took the initiative to leave. After a month of fierce battle, although Jun Wuya was not injured, he still needed to rest for a while. It was not difficult for Xiao Chen to see this from Jun Wuya's tiredness from time to time. After the month-long battle in the Heavenly Tower ended, everyone thought that the Great Thousand World should be able to get closer to each other. However, after only 3 days, a piece of news caused the great thousand world to fall into chaos again. The news came from the Heavenly Policy Mansion. It was an order personally issued by the Mansion Master of the Heavenly Policy Mansion, Li Chun. The order was very simple. It was a declaration of war against the Heavenly Yin Tower. Li Xiao and Yin Litian had just been seriously injured. In just 3 days, it was impossible for them to recover from their injuries. However, at this time, Li Chun actually took the initiative to declare war against the Heavenly Yin Tower. What was even more unexpected was that on the day the Heavenly Policy Mansion declared war against the Heavenly Yin Tower, the Tower Master of the Heavenly Yin Tower, Yin Xing, responded in just 2 hours. He could not wait to accept the challenge. The Heavenly Yin Tower and the Heavenly Policy Mansion immediately declared war. For a time, the powerhouses of the two forces began to mobilize. The battle between the sovereigns that had lasted for a month had just ended. Then, the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower, the two top forces in the Great Thousand World, directly started an all-out war. As a result, the Great Thousand World fell into chaos. Faced with this news, the other Ling Tian sects also had different thoughts. However, the most relaxed one was undoubtedly the Dao Ju. After hearing that the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower had started an all-out war, Dao Ju said with a smile, "I originally thought that the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect would be the first to start the war. I didn't expect it to be the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower. This is interesting." The all-out war between the two sects had undoubtedly set off the prelude to the chaos of the Great Thousand World, causing the chaos of the new era to completely erupt. Although only the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower had chosen to start the war, the other forces were also filled with the smell of gunpowder. The Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect, the Moon Palace and the Shrines, the Dan Valley and the Mu Tian Mountain, and the other sects were all filled with the smell of gunpowder. Under such circumstances, a small spark was enough to ignite the entire Great Thousand World. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 2183. The declaration of war by the Heavenly Policy Hall against the Heavenly Yin Tower was akin to the prelude to a chaotic world. Currently, the entire Great Thousand World was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Following the declaration of war between the Heavenly Policy Hall and the Heavenly Yin Tower, the Dan Valley, the Shrines, the Moon Palace, Mu Tian Mountain, the Sword Sect, and the Heavenly Sect entered a state of confrontation. It was obvious that the two sides had formed two huge alliances. However, due to their mutual restraint, they were unable to participate in the war between the Heavenly Policy Hall and the Heavenly Yin Tower for the time being. The war between the Heavenly Yin Tower and the Heavenly Policy Hall had completely broken out. At the same time, the Heavenly Sect had also started to become a little dishonest recently. According to the continuous news that was sent back from the border between the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Sect, the experts of the Heavenly Sect seemed to be intentionally or unintentionally gathering at the border between the two mansions. Although they had not shown any intention of attacking the Sword Mansion, the Sword Sect naturally would not take the Heavenly Sect's abnormal behavior lightly. Therefore, after receiving this news, Xiao Chun immediately transferred Lin Qing, Li Ku, and Yang Song to the border between the two mansions. There were also many experts from the Sword Sect who accompanied them. The only thing they did was to strengthen the forces at the border of the Sword Mansion to prevent the Heavenly Sect from suddenly attacking. As for Tsang Xing and Nangong Guan, Xiao Qin also asked them to temporarily postpone the matter of the martial institution. After all, the Sword Sect still had to prioritize the Heavenly Sect at this time. In the main hall of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun had been paying attention to the Heavenly Sect's every move for the past few days. Any news regarding the Heavenly Sect would be reported to Xiao Chun immediately. Tsang Xing, who had returned to the Sword Sect, was sitting on the main seat. At this moment, he was sitting below Xiao Chen. He asked with some doubts in his heart, "Will the heavenly sect really attack us at this time? I'm not sure. However, once the battle begins this time around, it will clearly be the final battle. Yang Chen will not easily stop until he achieves his goal," Xiao Chen replied indifferently. Xiao Chen was not sure if Yang Chen was going to declare war on the Swords Gate, but he was sure that if he were to declare war on the Swords Gate, it would not be a simple test. It would be a real battle to determine the winner and loser. Therefore, Xiao Chen couldn't let his guard down in the face of a battle that could break out at any time. This battle would determine the future of the entire Sword Sect. If they won, the Sword Sect would be able to return to the top and be ranked as one of the top 10 Ling Tian sects again. However, if they lost, everything that Xiao Chen and the Sword Sect had done would vanish into thin air. This was a battle of life and death, so naturally, Xiao Chen couldn't afford to be careless in the slightest. Xiao Chen was paying close attention to the heavenly sect's every move, not letting go of even the slightest change. On the other side, Yang Chen and Tao Ming sat opposite each other in the heavenly sect. Tao Ming looked at Yang Chen and said indifferently, "Have you really decided to declare war?" "Master, it's about time. This is the best opportunity." Hearing this, Yang Chen seriously nodded his head in response. Yang Chen indeed wanted to declare war on the Sword Sect. The heavenly sect had already made preparations for the final battle. Yang Chen didn't want to drag it out any longer because once it did, it would be hard to say how long it would take. Moreover, Yang Chen guessed that although the Sword Sect had always been on guard against the heavenly sect, the Sword Sect wasn't actually ready for war. Otherwise, with Xiao Chen's personality, he would have already attacked and wouldn't be on the defensive. He couldn't give the Sword Sect any more time to prepare, or the situation would only become more and more disadvantageous for the heavenly sect. Hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded and said, "How confident are you?" "About 50-50. After all, the Sword Sect's strength can't be underestimated," Yang Chen replied truthfully. Yang Chen didn't have absolute confidence in dealing with the Sword Sect, but this was reasonable. Otherwise, if he had absolute confidence, he would have already attacked the Sword Sect. Both sides were equal in strength, and if they really fought, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. However, this battle was unavoidable. Even if he didn't know what the final outcome would be, Yang Chen still had to fight. Xiao Chen had probably thought it through. In this world, there were many times when you couldn't choose to retreat if you weren't confident. There were some things that you could only bravely advance even if you weren't confident. This was the situation that forced you to do so. Just like Yang Chen now, he knew that it was impossible to coexist peacefully with the Sword Sect. Therefore, even if he wasn't confident, Yang Chen still had to choose to fight. After hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded slightly and said, "Now that the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower are at war, the shrines in Mu Tian Mountain are enough to contain the Moon Palace and Dan Valley. However, I'm still worried about the Dragon Palace." Tao Ming expressed his worries. The Dragon Palace and the Sword Sect had a close relationship. Once the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect started a war, the Dragon Palace would definitely not stand by and watch. However, after hearing Tao Ming's words, Yang Chen smiled slightly and said, "Master, don't worry. Chapter 2184. All signs indicated that the war between the Heavenly Sect and the Sword Sect was not far away. At the same time, the subordinate forces of the two forces were mobilized. More and more experts began to gather at the border of the two prefectures. It could be said that they had put in all their effort for this war. Not only Yang Chen, but also Xiao Chen. While the situation between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect was getting more and more tense, on the other side, Dao Ju received an unexpected piece of news in the Saber Sect. In the most secluded cave residence in the Saber sect, Dao Xiong's residence. At this moment, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju were sitting on the top of a mountain. A cold light flashed in their eyes as Dao Xiong said coldly, Ju, it's time to make a decision. Dao Xiong asked Dao Ju to make a decision. Just a few days ago, there was a piece of news from the Dragon Palace that Dao Xiong's wife, Dao Ju's mother, was killed by the people of the Dragon Palace. At that time, the two sects went to explore an ancient site together. However, in the end, Dao Ju's mother died in the ancient site. According to the Dragon Palace, Dao Ju's mother was killed by the mysterious power in the ancient site. Because of this, the Saber sect and the Dragon Palace had a war. Even Dao Xiong and Long Yuan personally took part in it. However, in the end, there was no substantial evidence to prove that his wife was killed by the Dragon Palace. In addition, for the sake of the overall situation, the matter was left unsettled. However, just a few days ago, there was news that Dao Xiong's wife's corpse was still in the Dragon Palace. This was completely contrary to what the Dragon Palace had said. Back then, the Dragon Palace said that Dao Xiong's wife's corpse was already gone. However, now, someone saw her corpse in the Dragon Palace. As a result, people could not help but guess that Dao Xiong's temperament had actually died at the hands of the Dragon Palace. Back then, because they had discovered some kind of treasure, the people of the Dragon Palace had mercilessly killed Dao Xiong's wife and a group of experts from the Saber sect, monopolizing the treasure. As soon as the news came out, Dao Ju immediately sent people to investigate, but the news was true. One could imagine Dao Xiong's mood when he heard the news. That was why he told Dao Ju that it was time to make a decision. And that decision was to declare war on Dragon Palace. No matter what, he could not let go of what had happened in the past. At the very least, he had to get Dao Xiong's wife's corpse back. After hearing Dao Xiong's words, Dao Ju replied seriously, Indeed, it's time. Sigh, what happened was too strange. Dao Ju also realized that it might have been secretly planned by someone in order to provoke a war between Saber sect and Dragon Palace. But so what if he guessed it? As long as his mother's body was in the hands of the Dragon Palace, the Dao Ju would definitely declare war on the Dragon Palace. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The person behind this was indeed a good trick. Even though he had guessed everything, there was nothing he could do but to jump into the pit. This was an overt conspiracy. Even if you knew everything, so what? You still had to follow the plan of the person behind this. Saber Ju's mood was a little complicated. On the other side of the Dragon Palace, Long Yuan and Long Qing were furious. In the main hall of Dragon Palace, Long Yuan sat on the main seat. Beside him, Long Qing stood with a cold face. Below, a Dragon Clan expert who had been tied up was kneeling in front of Long Yuan. Looking at him, Long Yuan said fiercely, Who made you do this? This Dragon Clan expert was the fuse of this incident. He was also the one who exposed Dao Ju's mother's corpse to the public. In Dragon Palace, this man was actually just an insignificant deacon. Although he had a cultivation of the Enlightenment realm, there were at least 800 people like him in Dragon Palace at that time. Usually, no one would pay attention to him. But who was there first? This time, because of him, the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect were on the verge of war. Looking at Dao Ju, Long Yuan and Long Qing immediately guessed that there must be a deacon behind this, and his purpose was to cause a war between the Dragon Palace and the Saber sect. Long Yuan asked with murderous intent in his eyes. At the same time, wisps of cold murderous intent were constantly emitted from his body and were shrouded by Long Yuan's aura. The person below clenched his teeth tightly. Long Yuan was an Emperor Realm expert. To bear his aura was indeed very stressful for this Dragon Palace expert. However, after this incident, this person knew that there was no way to change his fate. So, at this time, he simply threw caution to the wind. Anyway, he was going to die, so there was nothing to be afraid of. At this moment, Everyone resisted the pressure from Long Yuan and sneered. No one. I found out all of this by accident. Naturally, no one would believe his words. As his voice fell, Long Qing, who was standing beside Long Yuan, said in a deep voice, "Even if you don't say it, we know. It's Yang Chen, right? It's Yang Chen who asked you to deliberately start a war between the Dragon Palace and the Saber Sect so that the Dragon Palace can't support the Sword Sect, and he can take this opportunity to fight to the death with the Sword Sect." Long Qing said that the mastermind behind all of this was Yang Chen. In the entire Great Thousand World, the person who wanted the Dragon Palace to go to war the most was Yang Chen. In Yang Chen's plan, the Dragon Palace could go to war with anyone. As long as he could restrain the Dragon Palace and prevent them from helping the Sword Sect, it would be enough. Chapter 2185. Although Long Yuan already knew that Heavenly Sect was behind all of this and had guessed Yang Chen's motive, there was nothing he could do to resolve the situation. At the same time, Long Yuan also knew that Dao Ju and Dao Xiong must have guessed that someone was behind all of this. However, they had no choice as they had to fight this battle. Following Long Yuan's order, Dragon Palace quickly made preparations for the battle. At the same time, only 3 days later, Dao Ju declared war on Dragon Palace as the sect leader of Saber Sect. Before Dragon Palace could respond, a large number of experts from Saber Sect had already entered Sky Dragon Mansion, which was under the control of Dragon Palace. Instantly, the battle between the two sects broke out. After the war between Heavenly Policy Mansion and Heavenly Yin Tower, Saber Sect and Dragon Palace also broke out in a fierce battle. At this time, 4 out of the 10 Ling Tian sects had already broken out in battle. However, if one thought that all of this was over, one would be gravely mistaken. It could even be said that this was only the beginning of the chaos in the Great Thousand World. The outbreak of the battle between Dragon Palace and Saber Sect naturally attracted the attention of countless warriors in the Great Thousand World. At the same time, Xiao Qin, who was in the Sword Sect, also immediately realized that the battle between the Sword Sect and Heavenly Sect was not far away. Immediately, Xiao Qin ordered everyone in the Sword Sect to enter a state of combat readiness and be ready to welcome Heavenly Sect's attack at any time. Xiao Qin did not know the inside story of the battle between Dragon Palace and Saber Sect, but Xiao Qin guessed that Yang Chen had been waiting for this opportunity. After all, the sects that had a good relationship with the Sword Sect had already been pinned down, and only Dragon Palace had the possibility of helping. However, now that Dragon Palace had also started a war with Saber Sect, there was naturally no possibility of helping the Sword Sect. Yang Chen was waiting for such an opportunity. The Moon Palace was being held back by the shrines. The Heavenly Policy Hall had already started a war with the Heavenly Yin Tower, and the Dan Valley was facing off against the Mu Tian Mountain. If the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect were to start a war, there were no other forces that could help the Sword Sect. Xiao Qin gave the order for everyone to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Yang Chen was finally ready to go to war with the Heavenly Gate. Yang Chen and Tao Ming sat together in the main hall of the Heavenly Union Sect. A map of the Sword Mansion and the Heavenly Union Sect was placed before them. Looking at the map, Yang Chen's gaze did not lock onto the border between the two manors. At this time, the two sects had already deployed a large number of troops there. Many experts had gathered there, so there was no need to linger there. Yang Chen was currently paying attention to other places. Unlike Tao Ming, Yang Chen didn't want to fight the Sword Sect head-on. Instead, he wanted to use his aura as a tactic. He wanted to use the many experts to confuse Xiao Qin with the intention of making Xiao Qin think that his strategy was a head-on attack. However, in reality, Yang Chen wanted to use a surprise attack. At the time when Xiao Qin least expected, he wanted to appear at the place where Xiao Qin least expected. This way, he would be able to achieve a surprising effect. In order to achieve the goal of a surprise attack, he first had to think of a way to avoid the sword sect's eyes and sneak into the sword mansion. Following the map, Yang Chen looked all the way to the core area of the sword mansion. Finally, he pointed at a point on the map. "It's here." After finding the target, Yang Chen immediately said to Tao Ming, "Master, I'll leave the front to you." Yang Chen intended to let Tao Ming take charge of the front line. After all, the front line was just a distraction for Tao Ming. Therefore, having Tao Ming appear in the front line was undoubtedly the best, because it could attract Jun Wuya there. Once the two sects started a war, there was no doubt that wherever Yang Chen appeared, Jun Wuya would also appear. 315 Chinese network. Therefore, if Tao Ming was placed in the front, Jun Wuya could only go to the front and resist Tao Ming. Hearing Yang Chen's words, Tao Ming nodded slightly and said, "Don't worry. However, a month is the limit. Jun Wuya is slightly stronger than me. If the battle drags on, I will definitely be the one to lose. Therefore, you must hurry up." Tao Ming knew how strong Jun Wuya was. This was something that he had personally experienced. According to Tao Ming's estimation, he could only hold Jun Wuya back for a month at most. After a month, the difference in strength between the two would gradually become apparent due to his injuries and exhaustion. At that time, Tao Ming would definitely lose, and there was even a possibility of him being killed. Therefore, Tao Ming hoped that Yang Chen could hurry up and end the battle as soon as possible. Even if he couldn't end the battle, he should at least be able to gain a certain advantage. Only then would the situation gradually tilt towards the heavenly sect. In response to Tao Ming's reminder, Yang Chen nodded noncommittally. Then, the master and disciple went their separate ways. On that day, Yang Chen officially declared war on the Sword Sect as the sect leader of the Heavenly Sect. Following the declaration of war by the Heavenly Sect, many experts from the Heavenly Sect, who had already gathered at the border of the two palaces, immediately launched an attack on the Sword Sect. However, the Sword Sect's response was not very good. They immediately made preparations to fight. In an instant, a huge battle broke out at the border of the two palaces. The Heavenly Sect and the Sword Sect had already started fighting. Out of the 11 strongest forces in the Great Thousand World, 6 of them had already started fighting. The flames of war had spread across the entire Great Thousand World. Moreover, no one knew when the remaining forces would start fighting again. The Heavenly Sect and Yang Chen's declaration of war did not exceed Xiao Chen's expectations. In fact, it could be said that everything was within Xiao Chen's expectations. However, there was one thing that made Xiao Chen feel a little strange. The battle seemed a little strange because Yang Chen's figure did not appear at the front line. He felt that Yang Chen was definitely plotting something. Therefore, Xiao Chen did not leave the Sword Sect. On the other hand, Jun Wuya had already rushed to the front line because of Tao Ming. At the front line, many experts from both sides were fighting fiercely. Jun Wuya and Tao Ming also appeared at the same time. The two emperors stood proudly in the sky. In response, the experts from both sects fought even more fiercely. Their eyes met, and Jun Wuya looked at Tao Ming and said, "Tao Ming, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to escape this time." A rare murderous intent flashed in Jun Wuya's eyes. It seemed that this time, Jun Wuya really wanted to kill Tao Ming. In the face of Jun Wuya's murderous intent, Tao Ming said noncommittally, "Jun Wuya, although you're strong, this is a war between two great sects. Even if you're the strongest person in the Great Thousand World, it's too easy for you to change the entire situation with your own strength." As he spoke, a golden light shot up into the sky from Tao Ming's body. At the same time, his aura continued to rise and soon reached its peak. Chapter 2186. Tao Ming knew that he wasn't a match for Jun Wuya. However, this was a battle between two great sections. It would be difficult for Jun Wuya to change the situation by himself unless he had the ability to kill Tao Ming in a short time. Unfortunately, Jun Wuya couldn't do that for now. Sensing the terrifying aura from Tao Ming, Jun Wuya also released an aura that didn't show any signs of weakness. Instantly, the two sovereigns engaged in a fierce battle. As the strongest person in the Great Thousand World, Jun Wuya's strength was indeed unparalleled. However, even though Tao Ming wasn't as strong as Jun Wuya, he still had the ability to fight back. On the battlefield, both sides fought fiercely. No one was willing to be outdone, and no one was willing to lose. After brewing for such a long time, the battle between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect finally began. However, Shao Qin and Yang Qin didn't appear on the battlefield. Moreover, it wasn't just the two of them. There were other experts who didn't appear either. Although both the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect had gathered a powerful force and many experts on the battlefield, if one was careful enough, one would realize that this wasn't the full strength of the two great sections. Both sides had at least one End Realm expert and several Dao Realm experts who didn't appear on the battlefield. The whereabouts of these experts had become a mystery. Shao Qin didn't know about the situation on Yang Chen's side. He was still in the Sword Sect. Shao Qin, who didn't go to the front lines, was studying the map of the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect. At the same time, Song Xing and the 5 sword heads of the Sword Sect also didn't go to the front lines. The remaining experts were also waiting for orders in the Sword Sect. The reason Shao Qin left these people behind and did not send all of them to the main battlefield was because Shao Qin instinctively felt that something was wrong. Yang Qin had not appeared on the main battlefield since the beginning. A sneak attack. Shao Qin instantly guessed that Yang Qin was going to launch a sneak attack. But even so, it wasn't easy to determine where exactly Yang Qin would launch his sneak attack. Moreover, what made Shao Qin feel strange was that up until now, not a single one of the numerous spies sent out by the Sword Sect had grasped Yang Qin's whereabouts. In other words, Shao Qin didn't even know where Yang Qin was. Shao Qin had completely lost track of Yang Qin. He had no idea where Yang Qin was or what Yang Qin was doing. This made him increasingly anxious. As a matter of fact, Shao Qin wasn't too worried about the main battlefield because based on the current situation, both sides were actually evenly matched in terms of strength. No one had a huge advantage, and no one had fallen into a disadvantageous position. Therefore, it was impossible to determine the victor on the main battlefield at this moment. Therefore, the key point was still Yang Qin's current location. While staring at the map as though in deep thought, as though trying to determine where Yang Qin might launch a sneak attack or appear, Shao Qin asked Song Xing, "Is there still no news of Yang Qin?" "No, Sect Master." "Do you really think that Yang Qin can sneak into the hinterland of our sword mansion and launch a sneak attack?" Song Xing asked dubiously. Shao Qin replied simply, "Based on the current situation, this is the most likely thing to happen and also the most effective means to deal a heavy blow to us. With Yang Qin's personality, he won't miss this opportunity. In the current situation, it was better to be safe than sorry because once Yang Qin seized the opportunity, it would be a devastating blow to the Sword Sect." Hearing Shao Qin's words, Song Xing still didn't understand. But now that the entire Sword Sect has been sealed off, how can Yang Qin drive straight in? Could it be that he can use the other mansions and circle around to our sword mansion? Song Xing asked the question in his heart without giving it much thought. However, Shao Qin was stunned when he heard this. He then muttered to himself excitedly, "Why didn't I think of that?" Song Xing's words enlightened Shao Qin. All along, Shao Qin thought that Yang Qin would drive straight into the hinterland of the Sword Sect. However, didn't Song Xing say that Yang Qin could use the other mansions? Shao Qin suddenly realized something when he heard what Lu Xian had said. Indeed, the Sword Sect had been completely sealed off by the Sword Mansion. It would be very difficult for Yang Chen to drive straight into the hinterland of the Sword Mansion from the Hetian Prefecture. However, if Yang Chen could use the other mansions to get to the Sword Mansion like what Song Xing said, then he could bypass the main battlefield and successfully appear behind the Sword Mansion. Following this train of thought, Xiao Chen looked at the map and kept looking to the north. Finally, Xiao Chen's gaze locked onto Tong City. Tong City was located in the northernmost part of the Sword Mansion and also belonged to the border of the Sword Mansion. However, it was in a completely different direction from the Hetian Prefecture. As a result of the battle with the Hetian sect, Tong City had become a major backline. It seemed like Tong City was the safest place. However, in Xiao Chen's opinion, Tong City was the most dangerous place. Because it was far away from the Hetian Prefecture, the defense of Tong City was extremely lax. Most of the experts had been transferred to the main battlefield. Most importantly, if Yang Chen set off from the Hetian Prefecture, then he could bypass the main battlefield and reach Tong City through the Myriad Weapon Prefecture. Moreover, the Myriad Weapon Prefecture was now under the control of the Heavenly Yin Tower. It was extremely chaotic in the midst of the battle. Yang Chen could definitely use the Hetian Prefecture to launch a surprise attack on Tong City. Moreover, and most importantly, this was also why Xiao Chen thought that Yang Chen's surprise attack target was very likely to be Tong City. That was because there were many spiritual stone veins around Tong City. If these veins were destroyed, it would definitely be a devastating blow to the Sword sect. Think about it. What was the purpose of this war? It was not only a battle of the hard power of the two sects, but also a battle of soft power, wealth, and confidence. Healing pills, talismans, and other consumables needed money to buy. Without money, there would be no such things. The consequences were self-evident. It could be said that this war was a battle of the confidence of the two sections. Whoever had more confidence would have a higher chance of winning. Tong City had so many spiritual stone veins. If it was destroyed, the loss to the Sword sect would be immeasurable, especially during such a critical period. The more Xiao Chen thought about it, the more he felt that Yang Chen's target was Tong City. Moreover, if Yang Chen successfully attacked Tong City, he could directly turn around and form a siege on the battlefield. At that time, the situation would be even more disadvantageous for the Sword sect. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Chapter 2187. Because of Song Xing's words, Xiao Chen was suddenly enlightened. Tong City, which he had not noticed before, also appeared in Xiao Chen's field of vision. He could not help but sigh in his heart. If he had not reacted in time, Tong City would have suffered a devastating blow. Because of Song Xing's words, Xiao Chen was suddenly enlightened. Tong City, which he had not noticed before, also appeared in Xiao Chen's field of vision. He could not help but sigh in his heart. If he had not reacted in time, Tong City would have suffered a devastating blow. Staring at the map, Xiao Chen carefully looked around Tong City. Then, he fixed his gaze on the west side of Tong City. If Yang Chen really wanted to use the Myriad Weapon Mansion to launch a sneak attack on Tong City, then this was the place he had to pass through. Although there was no evidence to prove that Yang Chen would definitely appear in Tong City, Xiao Chen was still willing to believe in his own speculation. In addition, Tong City was too important and could not be lost. Therefore, Xiao Chen immediately ordered Song Xing to lead the remaining Sword sect experts to Tong City. Time was of the essence. Xiao Chen did not even have the time to inform Qin Shuru and the other girls. He directly led his men and left the Sword sect, heading straight for Tong City. While Xiao Chen had sensed the danger in Tong City and was rushing over, Yang Chen was indeed in the Myriad Weapon Estate. Judging from the direction he was heading in, he was undoubtedly heading towards Tong City. Xiao Chen's guess was correct. Yang Chen did not appear on the main battlefield. His purpose was to lead his men to launch a sneak attack on Tong City, destroy the many spirit stone veins around Tong City, and then head straight to the main battlefield to form a siege. Yang Chen knew very well what it meant to destroy the spirit stone veins around Tong City. It would be a huge blow to the sword sect. Therefore, Yang Chen did not stop at all after the battle between the two factions began. He headed straight for Tong City. In order to avoid being detected by the sword sect's spies, Yang Chen even deliberately passed through the 1,000-weapon estate. Although this would delay him a little, at least he could keep it a secret. As they sped along, Tong City was getting closer and closer. However, Yang Chen started to feel uncertain. He did not know if Xiao Chen would be able to detect his intentions, but now that things had come to this, Yang Chen had no way out. The Battle of Tong City had to be carried out. Otherwise, all of Yang Chen's previous efforts would be in vain. Yang Chen suspected that Xiao Chen might be aware of his intentions. Yang Chen's group quickly entered the Sword Mansion through the 10,000-weapon mansion. Tong City was right in front of them. As the group entered the Sword Mansion and was about to reach Tong City, Yang Chen became even more cautious. He did not dare to be careless. At the same time, he slowed down a little. The Heavenly Sect elder who followed Yang Chen asked in puzzlement, "Sect Master, we are not far from Tong City. Why don't we just kill our way over?" Tong City was right in front of him, but Yang Chen had suddenly slowed down. Naturally, the elder was puzzled. However, Yang Chen frowned and said, "I feel that something is not right." Yang Chen seemed to have sensed something. Hearing this, the elder still did not understand. However, Yang Chen did not intend to explain further. He just warned the group to be careful. In fact, Yang Chen's worries were not unfounded. Along the way, after entering the Sword Mansion, Yang Chen carefully discovered that there was not a single person in the villages and towns they passed by. Although they had not reached Tong City yet, the villages around Tong City seemed to have been emptied. It was indeed a little strange. However, Yang Chen naturally did not know that before they arrived, Xiao Chen had already moved all the people around to Tong City. This was to arrange a battlefield for both sides to fight without any scruples. It would not affect the ordinary people. Xiao Chen had been waiting for Yang Chen for a long time. Although Yang Chen showed enough vigilance in the end, he still entered Xiao Chen's line of sight. It was the battlefield that was prepared for both sides. Although they were very careful along the way, Yang Chen still led the group to the mountain range to the west of Tong City after half a day. There seemed to be nothing unusual about the mountain range. However, just as Yang Chen and the others entered the mountain range, red flames suddenly shot up into the sky from the mountain range. These were the lights produced by the talisman arrays. Caught off guard, the two Heavenly Sect experts were instantly swallowed by the flames. Upon seeing this, Yang Chen reacted immediately and tried to save the two of them. However, he was still a step too late. Moreover, more and more talisman arrays were activated at this moment. Yang Chen and the others were instantly attacked fiercely. Xiao Chen and the others had been waiting for a long time and were fully prepared. Now that the talisman arrays were activated, Yang Chen and the others were indeed exhausted from dealing with them. Damn it! Yang Chen cursed inwardly while resisting the attacks of the talisman arrays. He knew that Xiao Chen had seen through his intentions. It seemed that this sneak attack on Tong City had failed. However, it was too late to escape now. Moreover, with so many talisman arrays, several experts from the Heavenly Sect died on the spot. The sudden attack of the talisman arrays was something that the experts of the Heavenly Sect did not expect. Several of them died, while Yang Chen led the remaining people to resist. In the end, they managed to defeat the talisman arrays. After that, Yang Chen looked at the empty sky and said in a deep voice, "Xiao Chen, since you're here, why bother hiding?" Yang Chen was sure that Xiao Chen was here. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen, Song Xing, and the other experts of the sword sect appeared one after another. Xiao Qin fixed his gaze on Yang Qin and said with a faint smile, "Brother Yang Qin, what do you think of this greeting gift? It's not bad, right?" Upon hearing Xiao Qin's words, the frost python in Yang Qin's eyes grew denser. He thought that his plan was flawless, but in the end, Xiao Qin saw through it. Moreover, Xiao Qin was already prepared for this. As a result, before both sides even fought, Yang Qin's side had already lost several people. This clearly put Yang Qin in a disadvantageous situation. However, at this moment, the battle between both sides had already begun. It was impossible for Yang Qin to retreat now. Therefore, after hearing Xiao Qin's words, Yang Qin could only sneer and say without backing down, "Xiao Qin, do you think you can stop me like this? I'm not stopping you. I'm going to kill you here," Xiao Qin said with a sneer. The murderous intent in his eyes shot out explosively without any concealment. Xiao Qin indeed intended to kill Yang Qin here. If he could really do it, it would definitely be of great help in this battle. After all, even the sect master was dead. The morale of the heavenly sect would definitely take a hit. When that time came, the sword sect wouldn't be far from victory. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. The heavenly Yin Tower's Tower Lord, Yin Xing, was currently leading the experts of the heavenly Yin Tower to fight against the heavenly planning hall. Apart from the ceasefire, Yin Xing also heard about the battle of the two dusts. After learning that Xiao Qin and Yang Qin were both heavily injured, Yin Xing's eyes flashed with fighting spirit. "Xiao Qin, your head belongs to me, Yin Xing. No one can take it away. Don't die." Although Yin Xing wasn't present at the battle between Xiao Qin and Yang Qin, he was certain that most of the rumors were true. Apart from those rumors that were too exaggerated, the others were all quite plausible. For example, Xiao Qin and Yang Qin both had the strength to kill End Realm expert. Yin Xing didn't doubt this at all because he could do it too. If he could do it, then it wasn't surprising that Xiao Qin and Yang Qin could do it too. Xiao Qin and Yang Qin's battle caused other than Yin Xing, Dao Ju, Li Chun, and the other geniuses to be filled with fighting spirit. One could say that Xiao Qin and Yang Qin's battle caused the blood of all the geniuses in the world to boil. It unknowingly ignited the flames of war in their hearts. Not only Yin Xing, but Li Chun also muttered softly, "Brother Xiao Qin, has it started on your side?" Xiao Qin had already fought Yang Qin head-on. In Li Chun's opinion, his battle with Yin Xing was about to start. As the first battle between the Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Heavenly Yin Tower, Li Chun and Yin Xing had yet to fight head-on. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.